Today, we have the privilege of co-hosting this event with my dear colleague, Walter Nissler, the Chief of Section, the Senior Economic Affairs Officer at UNECE. The Future Networked Car Symposium is jointly organized by the ITU and UNECE. As many of you may recall, the FNC series was usually co-located with the Geneva Motor Show. However, with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic and the cancellation of the Geneva Motor Show in subsequent years, we have now taken FNC to the virtual space. We are happy to see that the interest and anticipation for the FNC continues despite this change, and we can already see many participants connected with us today online. At the outset of the session, we look forward to your active participation during our discussion, and we invite you to drop a quick message in the chat box with your name and the country from which you're connecting today. We're honored to have with us today Her Excellency Doreen Bogdan Martin, the Secretary General of the ITU, to give us her opening remarks. Doreen, please.
Well, thank you, Bilal. Thank you, Walter, and good afternoon from Geneva, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this year's Future Networked Car Symposium and to see our participants return year after year with experts deeply invested in this discussion, and of course with our partner UNECE. It's always great to partner with Olga, the Executive Secretary of UNECE. Walter, we look forward to sharing insights with you on regulators' ambitions for the future of mobility. I also want to thank John Todd, the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for road safety. He's going, I believe, to be delivering a message to us by video. Jean has been a longstanding partner of the ITU and UNECE in the work that we do to scale improvements in road safety innovation. It's an understatement, I think, to say that we live at a time of remarkable breakthroughs in science and technology. But for these breakthroughs to really have that lasting impact that we want to see on society, of course, they have to benefit everyone. And I would say everyone, everywhere. And that's what really drives the work of the ITU as the UN Agency for Digital Technologies. This, of course, requires extensive collaboration supported by a diverse range of expertise, which is precisely why partnerships are so central to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And while that's also why digital cooperation is one of my top priorities. Advances in artificial intelligence, in automation, in connectivity are really giving rise to a wealth of new opportunities to improve road safety. But to capitalize on life-saving technologies on a global scale, we need to make sure that we have synergy in the actions that are taken by industry players and by governments. And I think this highlights the value of ITU's partnership with UNECE. Our partnership helps to ensure that we have technical standards that are aligned with priorities of regulators. By bringing together our respective communities, we are supporting cohesion in the evolution of technology, business, and regulation. Cohesion, of course, that's fundamental to global progress in mobility. Our collaboration continues to grow in strength. Most recently with the expansion of our work that we have done together on vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communications. International standards represent consensus on the way forward, and they also stimulate global access to the knowledge and the technologies required to move forward together. ITU standards provide for high quality and high security communications in the intelligent transport context. They also support digital technologies and its growing contribution to road safety, from AI to the Internet of Things to vehicular multimedia. We're also committed to fostering a collaborative spirit amongst standards bodies and the growing range of stakeholders in our work. We've recently held the World Standards Collaboration with IEC and ISO, and on Friday this week, we're very excited to be hosting the collaboration on ITS communication standards, where all standards bodies that are working in intelligent transport will be represented. I do hope you'll join us for that meeting, as well as consult the collaborations database of all ITS standards, as we think this is a great mechanism that can support you in your work. So at this week's symposium, we will be discussing our respective roles in ensuring that new technologies lead to safer, smarter mobility and the actions required to ensure that we leave no one behind. And again, I do want to thank you all so much for your contributions to this important virtual discussion. And I also want to thank our terrific symposium moderators, Russ, Roger, Michael, and Ian. Thank you for this very exciting program and all the support that you have provided to this event over the past years. I want to wrap up by thanking all the experts that are gathered with us today. Your recognition of the complexity of the problems that we're working to solve is matched by your dedication to the task. With that, I wish you every success, and I just want to assure you that ITU will continue to support you every step of the way, because we do see a bright future ahead for mobility. With that, thank you, Bilal, and I hand the floor back to you. Thank you. You're muted.
I think it's Walter's
Thank you.
turn.
Yeah. Thank you, ITU Secretary General, for your enlightening remarks. And also from my side, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all around the globe attending this very important symposium. I am Walter Nissler, Chief of Section at UNEC, and I'm looking forward to this 18th edition of the symposium on the future network car that we cooperatively with ITU are managing every year. The FNC this year is spread over 4 sessions over the course of 4 days. I would like to make sure that you're aware that the separate registration is needed for each of these sessions. In this regard, we would like to invite you to register in advance for the desired sessions. Now we would have planned the intervention of Her Excellency UN Under-Secretary General Olga Algayeva, Executive Secretary of UNEC, who is on a remote location, and due to some connectivity issues, she cannot be with us. Therefore, let's welcome Mr. Dmitry Mariasin, Deputy Executive Secretary of UNEC, who will deliver the opening remarks. Over to you, Dmitry.
Thank you very much, Walter, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, colleagues. Let me start by passing Olga Algayeva's warm greetings to all of you, and especially to the Secretary General of ITU, Madam Doreen Bogdan-Martin. We truly appreciate the partnership with ITU, and I'm very pleased to deliver a few opening remarks on Olga's behalf as we launch the 10th symposium, the 2023 year edition of the symposium on the future networked cars. The event is indeed a collaboration between ITU and UNEC, to be more specific, within UNEC by the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations, WP29, and as such, from our perspective, is a unique international level platform to gather industry experts from automotive and telecommunication sectors, as well as their regulators. let me start by saying why this topic is important for UNECE. In a nutshell, because we believe in safer and smarter mobility, as the ITU Secretary General just said, we also believe in the importance of making sure that smart mobility is greener mobility and contributes to sustainable development goals more broadly and specifically to the climate agenda. Let me start with that, in fact. We all know we're at a critical juncture when it comes to the fight against the consequences of climate change. And we all know that the world is behind on the ambitious targets set in Paris in 2015. And we do know that transport can play a big role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we concluded an important session of the Inland Transport Committee, UNECE's governance body for all things inland transport. In fact, it's one of the main UN places where inland transport is discussed and has now an important interregional role covering countries beyond the EC region. And we focused this session on harnessing the full potential of inland transport for the global fight against climate change. As a result, we have a commitment from our member states, and greening transport, climate change mitigation and adaptation are now at the core of UNECE's work. I'm saying all this because we believe there is a strong link between connected vehicles, the new directions and the new frontiers when it comes to mobility from digitalization point of view, and the role this digitalization can play in reducing emissions, in making vehicles on the road not just smarter, but also greener. We also pay special attention to road safety in our work. You all are aware of the multitude of vehicle regulations, as well as other normative tools, standards, conventions that UNECE's Inland Transport Committee hosts. We are also very proud to host the Office of the Special Envoy for Road Safety, Mr. Jean Todt, and the UN Road Safety Fund. Road safety as such is at the core of our vision for a safer world. And we hope that, again, the conversation on automation, the conversation on digitalization in the automotive sector can be directly linked to a conversation about how do we actually get to reduce deaths and injuries on the road by half by 2030. This is a target set in 2015 that is unfortunately also very much off track. And we'd like to make sure that the expert community, the top-notch experts, both from the ITU and UNECE worlds, have road safety in mind when they speak about the future connected vehicles, about automation, and about digital technologies and mobility. Let me now turn to the importance of the symposium that we're launching today, specifically right now. And I'll start from the industry perspective. We know that the automotive industry has traditionally been a leader in innovation. And yet this industry is facing challenges today. Challenges about greening, challenges about road safety that I mentioned, but also challenges that are very specific to an interesting transition point at which the automotive industry finds itself. The transformation of the automotive sector is happening at an unprecedented pace. The shift towards electrification of vehicles, the need to adapt to cybersecurity risks, the push, to be more specific, the push to generalize driving assistance and develop automated driving systems are all still work in progress. These are opportunities and challenges at the same time. And these developments occur in the general context with supply chain challenges and inflation. So the industry is at the crossroad. The industry is facing challenges. And we hope that the agenda of the symposium shows that connectivity and telecommunications are there to help improve the effectiveness, to help us improve the way we work and communicate. And yet, the promises of technology breakthrough on telecommunications front do not always deliver. This was well demonstrated during the COVID-19 pandemic. We just a few years ago, a lot of policy discussions, including in the framework of this symposium, were about the deployment of 5G. However, can we be certain that the 5G technology has delivered on the promises and the marketing announcements? Has it had a concrete impact on transport innovations? Has it really led to autonomous vehicles powered by 5G? Experts share an opinion right now that the reality is different. And we also see that autonomous driving systems, automated driving systems, are being developed at a slower pace than expected, and would not always benefit, don't always benefit from connectivity to support the dynamic driving task of automated vehicles. So, as much as we have frontiers when it comes to sustainability and greening, when it comes to road safety, we do have technological frontiers still to be reached and overcome. And we have some very promising developments. For example, just recently, one proposal that came from China to the Working Party on Automated and Autonomous and Connected Vehicles at ECE to harmonize requirements for vehicle communications. It's a promising sign of progress, a promising sign of realization by our member states, by the industry, and hopefully will lead to progress in this respect. The ITU Secretary General mentioned the importance of regulators talking to each other, importance of connecting industry standards with broader intergovernmentally agreed standards. Here is a concrete task at hand, and we hope that collaborating across sectors, collaborating with ITU in this particular sphere, we can achieve significant progress. We have on our part embraced this partnership. We've offered ITU to join the WP29 meetings without restrictions, and we are very thankful for ITU's contribution to this important and sensitive intergovernmental process. For example, for the contribution ITU made to the drafting of the Cybersecurity UN Regulation number 155. Such partnerships are crucial to drive innovation and ensure that standards and regulations are in place to support this complicated transformation of the mobility sector. As we move forward, we must remember that the challenges ahead in terms of mobility, energy consumption, climate-related targets, which are referred to, the shocking road safety figures, and cybersecurity risks continue to require this collaboration. The automotive and telecommunication sectors have a crucial role to play in this transformation. So let's work together towards a sustainable future. Thank you, and I wish you an excellent session.
Thank you very much, UNECE Deputy Executive Secretary, for your remarks on behalf of Ms. Olga Algirova. Thank you very much, Dimitri Mariasin. And indeed, thank you for your frank analysis of the situation with the connectivity around the world and 5G in particular. And we look forward to continuing the collaboration. We're delighted to be again co-organizing this symposium with you, our sister United Nations agency, UNECE. We hope to continue this excellent collaboration between ITU and UNECE in organizing the symposium and in setting the international standards to support both the automotive and the digital industries around them. Moving forward to our third dignitary of today, someone who is cherished and known to race car and automobile fans worldwide, known also for his success in the Formula One with Ferrari over 2 decades ago. And now he has taken up another very important challenge and cause, road safety. Without further ado, Mr. Jean Todt, UN Secretary General, Special Envoy for Road Safety.
Executive Secretary Olga Algirova, my dear Olga, Secretary General Bogdan Martin, speakers and friends of road safety. I'm delighted to take part virtually in this future network car event. This topic is one of the most exciting areas of our field in recent years. Everyone here knows our goals are not simply ambitious. In aiming to halve the annual 1.3 million road deaths within the next X year, we need to devise methods that produce exponential results. The field of vehicular technology and innovation has this potential, tied into its very foundation and progress in the last few years. It was only in 2018 that WP29 created the Working Party on Automated, Autonomous and Connected Vehicles to provide the global focus for technical regulations. Just think about how AI development has exploded since then in the application and development of vehicles. According to OECD, AI alone could reduce up to 40% of road crash fatalities and injuries. That will bring us very close to our reduction targets if these technologies are quickly deployed, especially in low and middle income countries where more than 90% of road fatalities and injuries occur. Even by taking a developed country like the United States, for example, where I was last week, the road traffic fatalities are unfortunately on a roaring and increasing trend. Vulnerable road users are bearing the biggest burden. This includes a more than 30% increase in bicycle deaths in recent years. 90% of the reason for vehicle-to-bicycle collisions were reported due to the driver not seeing the cyclist. These are challenges and new trends that could have a simple solution through the integration of technology into vehicle detection systems. But along with the exponential growth of our technical expertise has also come a sense of caution. There will always be a need to ensure that the technology algorithms are reliable and accurate, and that they can operate safely in a changing variety of conditions. And as with your personal computers, we must make sure that our transport system cannot be hacked. But underlying this new area, our best shot to ensure safety between vehicles and the surrounding environment are the regulation and standards that we have the chance to develop. I urge the UN Global Forum for Road Traffic Safety, WP1, the UN World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations, WP29, and the ITU, with its ICT know-how, to work together to bring life-saving technology more rapidly so that the huge number of deaths and injuries from transport are reduced. You are the holder of standards and must make sure that we can use this important resource to contribute to improving road safety and without any chance of it adding to the terrible statistics. New technology in vehicles is a precious tool and one that can bring great advances in short periods of time. I thank you for your time and I wish you an excellent event.
Let's thank the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Road Safety for these insightful remarks and for reminding us on the importance of road safety and the aim of reducing fatalities and injuries and thus making our roads more safe. I also wish to thank again Her Excellency Ms. Doreen Bogdan-Martin, ITU Secretary General, and Mr. Dmitry Mariasin, Deputy Executive Secretary of UNEC, for their precious remarks. With this, our today's opening ceremony is concluded. With no delay, I wish to invite the moderator of session 1 to kick off the first session of the symposium that will address a fundamental question. Will AI-controlled automated vehicles be safe for road users? I'm pleased to give the floor to the moderator of the first session, Mr. Jan Arnold, who has played a pivotal role in leading the International Vehicle Standards Division within the UK Department for Transport. Mr. Arnold, the floor is yours. Please tell us more about your session. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Walter, and I hope everyone can hear me okay. Good. Okay. I assume you can. So welcome everyone to session 1 of the Future Network Car 2023, as you know, jointly hosted by the ITU and the UNECE. Let me firstly offer my thanks on behalf of session 1 to the executive secretaries of both the UNECE and the ITU, and to Jean Todt, of course, for their opening addresses and their vision and leadership in these important areas. Now, as many moderators will know, you write a few words of introduction and then you listen to the vision and leadership from the opening addresses, and suddenly you have to change things. And that's no different to today, because I was particularly taken by the comments by Doreen Bogdan-Martin, where she talked about digital cooperation, and that phrase kind of struck with me, actually, because I think it illustrates where we are on vehicle regulations, whether it's automation, assistance, or security, and connectivity. And of course, connectivity is in the title, Future Network Car, thinking about connectivity, and connectivity in my mind equals digital cooperation. But of course, within the UNECE and WP29, or Working Party 2029 to give it its full title, much has been achieved over relatively recent years. New regulations on advanced driver assistance systems, on automated lane keep systems, and these together provide the platform for motorway pilots in first levels of automation. And then GRVA, or the group of experts on vehicle automation, is currently developing recommendations for the evaluation of automated driving systems and automated vehicles. And of course, I think was mentioned by the Deputy Secretary of the UNECE, Dimitri Mariasin. He commented and highlighted the 2 regulations that were put in place maybe 3 years ago on cybersecurity and software updates. And they were seen at the time as very challenging to regulate, but nonetheless very important as we move forward. And coming back to this same phrase around digital cooperation, how do we ensure that over-the-air updates are undertaken correctly when they're intervening in some of the basic safety functions of the vehicle? And of course, this comes back to that notion of connectivity of the vehicle. And again, Dimitri also mentioned the work on vehicle-to-vehicle communications, and our work in that area in WP29 is just getting underway, where we're thinking about what role has WP29 and the regulator to play in delivering a contribution to ensure that we have consistency and harmonization in this important area. I think it was mentioned in the ITU Secretary General's comments about the standardization of communication protocols of vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure. But of course, that doesn't work if the vehicle hasn't got the connectivity capability. And so that's the role that WP29 might be able to contribute. But it was also mentioned in the opening address by the UNECE that the Inland Transport Committee just 3 weeks ago was thinking about connectivity, not from a safety point of view, but also from an environmental point of view, in particular to deal with the battery electric vehicle and the infrastructure related to recharging these vehicles. And so when we think about vehicle to vehicle communications, as much as we think about it from a safety point of view, it has much broader aspects and much broader contribution to ensure that as we move forward to low carbon or net zero and such like, that vehicle to vehicle connectivity will be such an important aspect. And of course, today, as Walter has just said, reading our title, will AI controlled vehicles be safer for road users? And my colleagues in the UNECE Secretariat have assembled a top-rate panel of speakers for us today. We have Jus Van Tom from Ertico, Lorianne Crid from the FIA Europe section, Maria Alonso from the World Economic Forum, and Barnaby Simkin from NVIDIA. and I will introduce those more as we get to their presentations. The session will have a feel of two separate sessions. So firstly, we will deal with the presentations, and in between the presentations, I'll take maybe one or two questions. So if you have a question, as I mentioned right at the start, please put it in the Q&A button at the bottom, and we will try and pick those up in between the presentations. If I don't get to your question, then don't worry, we'll get to that in the second session, which will be a moderated panel where each of the panelists will be the speakers, and they'll all be on screen, I hope, and we will be able to deal with the questions. In between the two sections or two sessions, we will have maybe a 10-minute break where we just have a chance to stretch our legs and then come back slightly refreshed for the panel session. So that's the plan. And now I'd like to invite Just to his presentation. Let me just give a few words of introduction to Just. Many of you will know Just. He's been in this area of vehicle technology. He worked at ACEA for a long time as their director of smart mobility. More recently, he's now the chief executive of Ertico in Brussels, a hugely respected and well-known organization representing the ITS community in Europe. He's the author of numerous papers in this area. He's a fluent speaker in many, many languages. And with that, I think I won't embarrass him anymore. So Just, over to you, and I'll stop speaking. Thank you very much. Thanks, Just.
Thank you, Ian. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yep,
as
good.
well as seeing my slide. Excellent. So thank you very much also to the leadership of the ITU and UNEC, my friends in Geneva. First of all, a big one thank you to Mrs. Bogdan Martin for her keynote speech and opening of the session, followed by Mr. Mariasin. Very enthusiastic words also on what we should do on road safety. Also, my colleagues of the ITU, Mr. Yamoussi, Jean Todt, of course, of the road safety envoy, Walter Nisler, who I know very well, of course, from the VP29 work, and Ian, yourself, of course, for years of experience. I remember well our R155, 6, and 7 regulations discussions, GRVA. So I'm feeling really in good hands also with my colleague panelists here, who I'm happy to meet with virtually. And indeed, it's about connecting in a virtual digital world. I've been asked to share a bit of light on what we think as a public-private partnership here in Europe on the combination of automated vehicles with AI activation and the link with road safety and road user safety. For the good understanding, of course, on automated driving, I take it as an assumption that we're talking about levels 3+ up to 5 of the SAE levels. These slides will be shared afterwards by François and the team, and I would like to guide you through this agenda. First, a bit of what we do in ITS Europe and Ertico, and it brings nicely to connect the dots with the world of connectivity and the physical, tangible world of vehicles. But secondly, also, is it really true that AI automated vehicles really deliver on safety and on security? But on this first, I will focus on safety here. And what are still the bottlenecks? What is still to be done? And by the way, it's not only about vehicles. It is about roads, it's about you and me, live people, flesh and blood people, and also about other objects that we will meet when we drive a vehicle. There is some homework for us. You did already quite a lot of homework at the ITU and UNECE, but still, as everything, it is never finished, but good progress is being made. Also on the policy front, where I will shed a bit of light, well, at least for the European area, what is happening. And finally, some projects and international cooperation we do, finalizing also my slides on the ITS Congress in May in Lisbon. So I take the advantage to guide you through that. First on Ertico. Ertico has been created 31 years ago by the European institutions, mostly the Commission, with the industry and with the public sector, to do one thing actually, to bring innovation in transport and mobility. It was about, I would say, vehicles still at that time, but about, I would say, HMI, the early days of interfacing with the driver. Today, it's much more about cloud services, interconnection between all these sectors. I have the luxury to be at the helm of this great organization with all the 8 sectors that we have in 125 partners or members of that, encompassing Europe, Middle East, and Africa. On this, the partner list, you see a lot of public and private parts. That's exactly the motto that we have, the DNA. It's public-private cooperation, like you do at ITU and UNECE with these stakeholders. Now, ITS is a topic that we discuss in a specific informal working group lately with some of you, and it's actually something that allows to connect the dots. And these dots are actually in all these columns and all these nice pictures that you see. So it's not only vehicles that drive connected and automated in the future, but it's much more. And we are trying to be the glue, being the horizontality across all these sectors, things. Now, the subject of today was the AI-driven or the AI-activated automated driving vehicles, or they're really promising on the delivery for benefiting safety. And we did a bit of homework in our system here and taking into account the projects that we do. We quite a number of projects here, I think 80 projects in total with European funded approach and also based on thought leadership. And we believe that indeed AI has the beauty of going for perception management up to adaptive models. From perception, what we see is that an automated vehicle is capable of actually apply the computer vision with the cameras, lidars, and radars from our suppliers, the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, great things, software, mainware, hardware, that are really able to detect the environment. Environment being vehicles, being pedestrians, being motorcycles, and being objects in the streets or on the street. So it's actually up to the OEMs and up to their constituency to create these 3D maps with what's happening around the vehicle. Now that's actually quite passive. It's taking the outside to the inside and digital twinning. But then you have to make decisions. And there, these algorithms are really crucial and actually are also at the basis of high-level decision-making, high-level computing as well, and high computing power, where we do data analysis based on a scenario, reference scenarios. So we discussed this also in some of the working groups within GRVA. And these decisions are based on data, obviously historical data or data from now, not yet future data, cannot yet see in the future, but it's about optimal route planning, avoidance of hazards, and all, of course, with the purpose to do road safety. Obviously, a lot of these things are also done for comfort services, for non-road safety related purposes, but that's definitely outside this subject here. Also with the drivers, I would say activated systems through the voice, where somebody intelligent will capture the voice and make a decision, or at least an interpretation out of it. So NLP helps very much on this decision-making process. Now, of course, that's never done this homework. We have an adaptive process, a learning process. It is based on deep learning, on machine learning, and of course on experience. Like we have the ODDs for automated driving, we have relatively similar to the same for artificial intelligence. Now, it's a kind of agile way of doing and learning and adapting the activation of, it can be braking, steering functions, it can be all kinds of other maneuvers. Yeah? And obviously you need redundancy. Like in telecoms, we have networks with redundant fuels, I would say. We have the same here. You need to have multiplication of sensors, cameras, and fusion so that there is a backup scenario. Now, the goal of all this is definitely the human error reduction. We see that still a lot of fatal accidents are being caused by human error, but not only human error. And an interesting study we found from the US Institute is this one, where they say, well, there are still a lot of human errors based on these things. It can be errors in sensing things by the eye, perceiving by your minds, errors in predicting yourself, a misjudgment of the maneuver that you have to do, going to left, going to right, accelerate, decelerate, these kind of things, or error in planning, and sometimes error in execution, going to the left instead of going for the right. And finally, unfortunately, incapacitation as well. So all these human errors can to some extent be mitigated and hopefully replaced or solved by AI in automated driving. So that's exactly what we see. It's facilitating of the environment, the perception, and the accurate decision making. However, there are some concerns, and I'm sure that my colleagues in the panel will also hint to that, because AI is always something that takes stock of, I would say, data proliferation, data working of the past up to the moment now. not yet for the future. So there is a legacy that we have to cope with. Yeah, decisions are always based on data that are being in algorithms worked on, have been trained on, but cannot yet be future data, at least not to my knowledge. So there is some limits to handle unpredictable situations. The second thing is, of course, like all of us, learning is never finished. That's why you have these beautiful webinars now, always to learn further. And the issue there is, well, when do we have over-reliance on technology? When do we step out of the technological value chain and really keep ourselves again as a human being? So what is the perfect mixture there? There are some new ODDs that are never being embedded in the trained algorithms. And there can be, unfortunately, errors with software and hardware that have nothing to do with AI, but that can happen. Another, I would say, cluster of question marks that we have, all of us have in Europe and in the world, is the legal environment, the policy environment, but also the ethical environment. The Molly syndrome, for example, or the trolley syndrome. We have in Europe a new legislative framework that will come up on liability, on product liability, on service liability for AI, but also on AI itself. Now, and we have some ethical considerations that we need to discuss probably in this panel as well. Where do you give priority on? To a human life, and then to which kind of human life, what prioritization, and who is programming this? And actually, I think in the UK, there has been some interesting work done recently by the Law Commission, for example. And obviously, cybersecurity and safety, but it's definitely cybersecurity. I do not think I have to recall all the work we did jointly on the regulation that is now out for cybersecurity of vehicles. And definitely, when we talk about connectivity, about data sharing, mobility data spaces, these things are being connected and interconnected with each other, meaning that there is always a risk of a security issue, a data breach, for example. Now, we talk now about vehicles and roads, but it's definitely much more than vehicles hitting the road. It is about infrastructure, about not only the technology on the vehicles, which is really greatly improving. And I think we can be very proud in what we see on the vehicle sector, how much this has been evolved. But it's also the road infrastructure sector. So those guys who are responsible for the tarmac, for the asphalt, for the digital twins of these things, for the traffic lights, for the smart intersections, for the smart cities environment. And they all cope with each other and with vehicles more and more, but also with vulnerable road users in the future, thanks to cellular connectivity and other connectivity. And we also have digital platforms. When we talk about multimodality, where the vehicle is in one of the segments of mobility, we talk definitely about multimodal traffic information, multimodal data sharing. And so for that, you need I would say a platform or platforms that are interoperable. And also they have to capture the right data and work with algorithms and artificial intelligence, because users of these data can also activate systems in the vehicle or deactivate systems in the vehicle. So it takes much more to tango. It is actually 4 to tango. It's the physical road infrastructure. So our colleagues of IRF, for example, International Road Federation, with whom we have signed an MOU with Ertico to actually go into detail, what do we really need from this physical road infrastructure and the suppliers to that. Another aspect is data sharing, where I'm really happy and proud to be in Europe here, where we have an overriding data sharing framework, principles, front conditions, and also a data sharing approach in mobility. It's not yet over, it's not yet the end, but we are really making good progress also thanks to our work with my Ertico team. Mapping localization, very much important, sometimes AI driven as well to increase the accuracy. But I don't think that's enough. We do need some regulations. We do need standardization as well, not only within one country, but actually to make things cross-border, to make things also cross-continental. We have that discussion with some of the regulations we recently adopted in the UNEC, also at ITU, and we have it as well with standardization now. I see what's happening in the ISO, but also in other bodies like the CN, CEN and CENELEC and ETSI, what we do on standardization of some of the protocols, for example. Another question for another example is the CITS, for example, when vehicles communicate with other vehicles and with the road infrastructure, sometimes based on AI-driven data sharing. But that's not enough. We need to maintain the roads. We need to maintain the digital twins, and we need to keep up with new technologies. It's never done. It is always a question, what do you do with the legacy fleet and with the new fleet? And what if the new fleet is not backwards compatible with a given technology that is being used by the legacy fleet? So these are just a couple of things to make things more complex, Ian, for you in the panel. But we need all these around the table. And it's a perfect scenario that we have here with UNEC and ITU on this. And let's not forget, there is still the driver. There is still you and me, or the persons that are being driven by a level 4 or even level 5 automated vehicle or automated instrument. Now, we should talk about the public and user acceptance without preempting what my colleagues will say in the panel, but I think these things are vital questions we all deal with worldwide. It's about the question, do we want to rely or over-rely on technology? And where do we have the tipping point between your own decision-making and when do you hand over, literally hand over to technology and to decision-making done by a third party, actually, or a third system? Yeah. How do you handle digital divides? The connected automated people and the non-connected, non-automated. What do you do there? If you have mixed traffic, for example, what does the AI, you switch it off? Not sure you can. So how will that be in the practice? And we've seen some of the examples in recent projects where it's easier said than done to have this mixture. Yeah. It's probably much easier to have it on a confined area with automated shuttles, and robot taxis is a bit more difficult, I would say, if you really put them into the live traffic. Another concern, or at least questions we got, is personal data. In Europe, we have the GDPR standard, where actually a lot of consent has to be given to usage and processing of personal data. But also a lot of data is personal data because it's being, I would say, injected or being generated by your behavior, by your vehicle, by your way of doing. But what does it happen? When does it happen? When AI is doing things for you without you actually knowing it or not really fully aware? These questions on, well, security and safety of personal data is also something which peeps in very recently. Driver license requirements. There was a question on, should we have a driver license for the car, for the vehicle, instead of the driver, instead of you and me? And where does AI jump into the wagon here? Who will actually validate the various algorithm scenario, the ODDs of the algorithms, who will actually give the red or the green signal for that, like we do for vehicles type approval. Now, there are some worries about the cost elements. All these features, not only ADAS, but mostly high levels of automated driving with AI, with reliance on third parties, software and cloud systems or edge systems. All this adds incrementally to a cost somewhere. You cannot compress all these costs. So there are some worries also in Europe about the cost of these additional features. They're most welcome, these features, but at the cost of something. And finally, some economical questions. We had it in the truck platooning discussion in Europe, where we have led a European project on truck platooning here with Ertico and many others. And we've seen some questions on the resting and driving times. It's all fine, but who will replace the trucking? Who will replace the driver? And what is then the social and mostly economic impact of that? So I think more questions than answers. The homework is definitely to improve road safety by these things. And I'm quite sure that the automotive sector, my friends, and also the suppliers and the IT connectivity providers are doing their utmost to provide all these things. But it's work in progress. I was 2 weeks ago in Barcelona at the Mobile World Congress. Most people talked about 5.5G, about the sensing capacity that is needed with, for example, vulnerable road users, pedestrians, communicating with smart traffic lights and interacting with AI or vehicles. So something we probably have to discuss as well is the policy framework. And I know within UNEC, we already touched upon that in some of the informal working groups. We definitely need to have a close look at the new European framework for automated driving. There is a brand new implementing act based on the General Safety Regulation. And it's actually all based on the work we've done here at the GRVA, at VP29, and then the Inland Transport Committee. There is an increased role of AI validation and certification, but also when it comes to automated systems, there is a high risk qualification of some of these automated transport systems, which leads to a higher increased regulatory oversight, meaning that a regulator, independent body in a country will have to step in ex ante. So before even you put these vehicles on the market or the international, the artificial intelligence systems, they need to validate the whole process mechanism that you have gone through. Easier said than done. We're now discussing this act at the Parliament and European Council in Europe, as well as the rules that will be uplifted on liability. As a colleague mentioned in the beginning, it is not a product anymore. This is a combination of a product, which is the vehicle, with a service, which is the data gathering and the artificial intelligence captation and computation. But also it's also a mixture with outside events, force majeure or not. It can be weather conditions, it can be obstacles, it can even be people, or it can be yourself. Yeah. So that's quite a hell of work now to go through. We take good inspiration of what's being done in other continents and outside Europe for that as well. And all this will be part of, I would say, data sharing. And for that, we are setting up a true European mobility data space to exchange data, not only for safety-related critical things, but also for convenience. So a good example of such a data sharing platform is one that we lead in Ertico with member states, with road authorities, with vehicle manufacturers. It's called Data for Road Safety, and it's actually data capturing from vehicles on the left side, level 1 raw data, which are being uplifted and thanks to artificial intelligence, merged, fused up to an event, up to a intelligent data. So from raw data to, I would say, intelligent data that is being used for road safety. A number of use cases are slippery road, for example, or blockage of the roads, or temporary roadworks. All this is data that will be gathered through that system, through these members, and being sent out again to the same members in an enriched format. So 1 + 1 is 3 on that. We have 21 partners today. Happy to host newcomers, of course, in this group. It's a European-driven public-private partnership on this one. A number of other funded projects. I'll give you the links here on this slide, or these projects. Some of them managed by us, some others are not, but very active partners of Ertico in there. You see them, it's all based on AI, and actually very recent projects just started. The 3 below actually are based on trustworthy AI for automated driving. So exactly the core of what we discuss here, and the link with road safety. Also very pleased that I see a lot of international initiatives and cross-sharing of that. For example, the colleague in the World Economic Forum will probably talk about this. IEEE, a good standardization work or exchanges. UK has done quite some work. So Ian, in your country, you did quite some good work on I would say, ethical aspects on artificial intelligence, also liability aspects, and obviously BP1 and BP29 of UNEC. Final words, we will showcase, demonstrate all these at our Congress in May, so in a couple of months from now in Lisbon, with the Commission, and more specifically with around 5,000 people. We have 400 special interest session papers received. So we have to select 100 papers of these 400 because we cannot accommodate all these things. The good news is that a lot of papers deal with this subject: automated driving, artificial intelligence, road safety, and I will be pleased to see you all there. If you have any question further on the Congress, find it on our website. And at this, without further ado, Ian, I'll give the floor back to you. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be in touch now. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Just as always, an excellent presentation and runs through a huge amount of information. Now, at this point, I usually invite any questions to be added to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I can see we've got one from Nigel Wall, but I think that might be where we need to bring in maybe Barnaby a bit later on, because that is a vehicle manufacturer question as well. So let me hold that one. So Nigel, we will get to it, but we won't get to it maybe until a little bit later on. I don't know whether colleagues have got and delegates have got any other questions. In the meantime, I might just come back to this issue about data, and you touched on that in one of your slides, Just. Yeah, data has been a challenge for a number of years, and data sharing, data privacy and such like. Has there been any progress in the EU on trying to determine how to overcome the challenge of international regulations, such as an EU regulation, with the domestic regulations in different countries? Because I remember that being a problem in past times. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, the data subject is part of the data strategy of the Commission, European Commission, that has been put forward 3 years ago now. What the Commission wants to do is first to have more data available from smart instruments, I have to say. It can be vehicles, it can be refrigerators, it can be all kinds of smart devices, IoT devices. Because Commission and the society believes that the more data are available and accessible, the more, I would say, better use can be done by others in the value chain, upstream or downstream. It can be researchers, it can be governmental authorities, like look to the COVID crisis, for example. The number of data that you could gather potentially from whatever instruments would be very good to know for scientific purposes, for medical purposes, etc. The same goes for data coming from vehicles. And that's a particular vertical that is being touched upon now also in the European framework. Europe has come forward with a horizontal data act encompassing most of the, I would say, IoT devices, including vehicles, but general principles, but that go, I would say, quite far and quite new in terms of regulatory European standards. I will not go into that, that takes us 2 days in itself, but it's a European, I would say, standard that is being put there, a bit like GDPR or like AI they want to do as well. That is the Data Act, which is now still in discussion, last phase now. And there will probably be a vertical, I would say, data sharing mechanism for vehicle data, for in-vehicle data, towards the downstream markets, including OEMs if they're active on downstream markets. On the other things, indeed, there has been discussions on GDPR, where we have the European Data Protection Board that has put forward a decision or a recommendation on what is personal data, what is non-personal data. There is the free flow of data, and the e-privacy regulation that touches upon non-personal data. So it's getting quite complex, Ian. But we made some progress if you compare it with 3-4 years ago. Yeah, things are moving. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, great. No, thanks very much. Obviously, clearly very knowledgeable about these things, and that's helpful, I think, to probably everyone on the call to understand these issues and how things are progressing in the European Union. Now, I think we'll move on now. Just thanks once again for your excellent presentation, as always. So now we're going to move on to our second presentation. Let me welcome Lauriane Crid. Lauriane Crid is the Director General for the FIA region, or European and Africa and the Middle East. And I think, Lauriane, you've been doing this for about 5 years now or so. You're an expert in political science and in the EU, and you have a couple of degrees in that area. Now you're based in Brussels, and of course you represent the FIA. But I think it's just worth mentioning that I think across your responsibility, which I think is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, you've got about 38 million members. So you could be said to have a huge responsibility resting on your shoulders to represent the views of motorists and society as well. So I wonder if you can tell us a bit about how you think the users of these very clever AI-controlled vehicles might think about them in the future. Thanks, Lauriane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thanks a lot UNECE and ITU for the kind invitation. No pressure, but thanks, Ian, for reminding me that we represent 38 million members across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I have, big disclaimer, I have tweaked a little bit my presentation since the presentation from Joost, and I would like to start now with obviously the presentation. Can you all see it all right? Because we had some issues in the test.
Yeah, it looks good. I can see it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So indeed, I mean, I was very happy to receive the invitation. It's the second edition for me, and I enjoyed the discussion and the presentation. So for me, it was great. Then I read the title, got me a bit more puzzled about AI-controlled automated vehicle and what it could mean. So I want to start with maybe two things. The first one, even if it wasn't really a question to me, Ian, yes, data is something that is very concerning to users. We've done a number of surveys. We've asked people about their vehicle data, and definitely what comes out of it is that they feel the data they generate while driving belongs to them. in the sense that they want to be able to authorize or not their use, further use or reuse. And in the sense, as a second option, that they actually want to be getting any increased or convenience or increased services for this data. So the idea is very much there in the panel of users that we've interviewed, that if I'm going to share my data, I want something in return. And that should be very much in the heart of the discussions, no matter where and in which agreement. So I felt it was important to say that. And I would say, you know, I just mentioned the Data Act, but the car is not a fridge like any other. I think there are expectations on the connected vehicles and on the vehicle sides that go way beyond any normal connecting devices, because it's pervasive, it's in your daily mobility, and it has ties to everything you do around. So there's also extra sensitivity when it comes to privacy. Where have I been? What have I done? Bearing in mind that this needs to be taken into account when we talk about car data. So yes, they want to share, they're happy to share, broadly speaking, but they also want to be in charge of where the data goes and the data flows, let's say. I also
Laurie,
yeah.
Sorry, can I, would it be possible, I think, could you put it in presentation mode? I think Gifty has asked that. I'm not sure how you do it.
Yeah, I have that problem again that I see it in presentation mode, but
okay.
So
wait,
let me
yeah.
try again. And then oops, because I had understood that this was working, and if I do it like this now, or like wait just one sec. Is it any better? I still see it exactly the same.
Yeah,
so.
no, I think that's that's better. No, we've lost it altogether.
Right,
Now.
took it off.
We just have you.
Let me try it once more, because I don't know. At one point it worked, but I was puzzled. I never quite understood why it worked and it didn't work in the pre-session. Yeah, it will be the same, I guess.
Okay, I think let's proceed with how you. No, I think
Not better. Huh?
Well, that's fine for me. I think everyone will understand it. Let's
we could project on your behalf, and you just say next slide. Would that be okay?
It would, but I really am puzzled, because now what I see is exactly presentation mode on both my screens, because there was something with two screens.
Yes, we do not see presentation mode.
So what do you see?
We see just a step before, when it's not in presentation mode. But without wasting time, I would recommend.
Okay, fine. No, sorry. Yes,
Gifty will present. Will project your slides,
it's
and
just
then
that we'll miss the one slide I added then. But it's fine. I can do it while you share the slides. What I did is I looked back as well, because what we say is that it's crucial for users to be involved and to be in the loop. And what I looked back is one of the surveys that EuroNCAP had done, and I added it to the slides. I can put it in the next following item. And it was really a survey of people asking them, and there was about 4,000 or 5,000 people in Europe, which of the brands that currently sell cars with technologies that allows the car to drive itself without the driving having to handle anything. And the general result of this survey was that about 30–35% of respondents believed that this was actually already on the market. So there is a huge effort to be done in terms of explaining what is possible and what's not. But on this presentation, and then you can move to the next one, I wanted to focus more about what are the users' needs when it comes to understanding the technologies, what are, let's say, the common work that we could do together with the UNEC, and that we do, because some of the things I will be presenting are elements of our positions towards the UNEC and the different working groups, and what are the outlooks for the future. So on the next one already, consumers' expectation, I went back to a survey that was carried out in a European project, which is past, so it's not been mentioned by Joost, the L3 pilot. It was quite broad, so it's 5 continents, it's 17 countries, and it has about 30,000 users asked. And they were really asked about level 3 automation, so it's L3 pilot. What are their expectations there? And for those of you who are interested, the link to the full survey, which is quite extensive, is on the notes of the presentation. So on the next one, you have the key expectations. And the key expectations were, unsurprisingly, I would say, but really people were most positive about travel comfort and productive use of travel time. So that's where about more than half of people expected a better service with higher automation levels. So blue, normal blue, regular blue bars are really what are people expecting an increase in convenience in use of time during driving. The dark blue is really no change expected, so not a high level of expectations on these higher level of automation. And the light blue is a decrease. And in terms of accidents, in terms of road safety, which was mentioned by Jean-Ted as well in the opening, there were still a huge amount of people who expected a decrease of accidents, so about 44. At the same time, some people expected an increase, about 20. So that shows clearly a sort of divide into the expectations and what I can expect from higher automation cars. And on congestion, it's also a very mixed picture, with more people expecting, let's say, no change or even a slight increase of congestion. Of course, if you have more automated vehicles on the road, you will potentially have more trips on cars and potentially have more congestion. But indeed, I mean, the key expectations for now is really me able to engage in another task and having increased comfort, meaning I could do something else, or I could be less stressed about the driving task, or I could, for certain part of the travel, hand over to a machine. So on the next slide, you have indeed this kind of weird responses when it comes to road safety. So it's still about half of the respondents said there will be no change in the number of car accidents, which shows a relatively low confidence into the higher level of automations and how best they could perform the driving test as compared to human. We all know that in certain conditions, in fog and heavy rains and so on and so forth, as much as we are saying that the human driver can be part of can be a good reason or a part of the reason why an accident occurs, it's still a relatively performant, non-automated, non-AI driver, let's say. So there are still some reservations there. And then, of course, we see a risk when we deploy increasingly automated vehicles, that what would be the media coverage? Would we be able to track and to have the long record, safety records that we have for the current ways? And of course, as mentioned already in the beginning, it's part of a safer system. So yes, it will be a question about the interaction in between the different modes, in between more active modes that are taking more and more space in the urban areas as well. And there will be a question of, you know, how much this AI, how much this learning or this improved software. Sorry for not calling it the very technical names, but I think in terms of consumers understanding that AI means actually optimizing, improving the software in the vehicle is probably much easier than AI-powered automated vehicle. No offense to the marketers who developed this title, but that felt to me that this would be the right way of putting it to the consumers. And on the next one, I felt it was interesting as well. Then you see how there is a correlation in the countries where the lowest GDP and a relatively high death rate, people are more keen to embrace and to actually use the L3 vehicles. So there are, on the one hand, probably thinking this will help or this would improve the situation in my country, or the driving task is quite useful to be supported with extra systems. Whereas in the countries with less deaths, like Sweden, you see on the right-hand side, people are less keen on embracing the L3 cars. So where do we stand, and where do we stand as FIA Region 1? So Europe, Middle East, and Africa, but this one is really mostly centered about Europe, on what do users need when it comes to automated driving. That's already the next and the next. So our position is relatively simple. It comes down to empowering the users. You can switch to the next already because this one is quite empty. So what we think is you need a good HMI system. So you need a good human-machine interaction to prevent the decrease of attention, especially in the transitional phase. I mean, at this moment in time, I'm really talking the in-between, not the level 5 with almost no intervention needed and a safe mode activated in case of problems. I'm really talking in all the in-betweens. And on this one, we also want to promote education, training, and awareness of the technologies. We have had, and I'm sure many of you are aware, an extensive number of automated driving, assistance driving systems that have been mandated into EU vehicles, and there are still a huge needs of educating the users about what they mean, what they can and cannot do, when they trigger, and if they can be activated, deactivated, and the limits of these systems. So that's something we work on at the EU level, also looking into the driving license directive to get the knowledge to the users about what their vehicles is able to do. And it's at the driver training is one element, but of course, as you buy a new vehicle, the question will be as to where and how. Should the dealer be responsible for giving you the insight? Should the driver manual be enough? And there, I think we still need to figure out the right way to make sure that the users are actually informed about all the systems. The bottom line is many of these systems that can be deactivated will be, if they're not understood properly, or if they trigger in inappropriate moment or with different warnings that are not understood by the user. So if the aim, and it is for safety systems, is to have wide support and wide data coming from these systems, people need to understand what they can and cannot do and understand the boundary conditions in a very simple and non-technical manner. On the other slide, I have the rest of the recommendation. Obviously, we need HMI that are user-friendly, that are simple enough, and that gives you sufficient lead time if you need to drive again after or take over from the systems. And the idea of data sharing, we're not opposed to data sharing. There needs to be sufficient data sharing between private and public actors to make the digital maps available. But of course, all of that for us is based on informed consumer consent. And I think that's where the difficulty lies when we talk about AI automated driving functionalities, because it will be work in progress. And then there's a need to update the knowledge of the people as we go. So when it comes to more specifically the work that's being done now at UNECE, you can move on to the next slide. Then we think we need to build transparency to foster the trust in AI. Not every one of the models are simple or understandable for the user. We need to understand what they mean, what they do, how they function, and what we think could be a way of collaborating between, let's say, the technical expert at UNECE or at EU level and the users is to have some sort of certification by type, to have real-world testing, and to have regulatory requirements. Obviously, looking into the general safety regulation, the general data protection regulation, to make sure that we respect the user's rights. On the next slide, I have a bit of more meat on the bone. So the certification could be by type approval authority. We need to have a check that these systems are actually complying with the type and with the approval as they go. I mean, a car is typically up to 10 or 15 years old. And we need to have some sort of a classification of algorithm based on the risks and the potential threats that they represent for society as a whole. And of course, we need to have a first good idea about what are we going to do if something happens, what are we going to do if there's a risk that needs to be taken into account before this is put on the market. So moving forward to the next slide, what we say is that any AI learning coming from the driver, coming from the driving task must be changeable. You must be able to reset it if needed. All the software updates must be transparent and user-friendly. You should have the choice to actually implement it in your car, to agree on those that are not typically absolutely necessary related to safety, security, and the environmental performance, and you should be able to test during the whole lifetime. Once again, when it comes to these technologies, I mean, a car will be typically on the road up to 12 years in Europe at the moment. So we need to make sure that these systems work and that they work throughout the whole lifetime of the vehicle, not that you actually we provide a system to the user, telling him or her this can be doing this and that 5 years down the line, when the vehicle is a bit older, it's not any longer supported. It does not give you the same level of services or of safety and so on. We also need to be careful about, any illegal cycle beating by AI software, a lesson hardly learned during past crises. Next slide. Of course, and again, I don't have the intention in 10 minutes to talk about all of this, but there are ethical aspects. So we should treat everybody in the same correct ethical way, and we should always go for the no harm people. So avoid all damages if possible, if not possible, then at the minimum, minimize damage, which is much easier written down in a few words in this slide than actually applied to every potential situation that this may be in. So you understand that from this perspective, from our side, this needs to be incremental. This needs to be learning on the back of what we have, sharing data, making sure that the steps we're taking are making the road safer and greener, and that they're actually providing users with all the information they need to to adhere and to support the systems as we move on. So there's, I think, one last slide, which goes about what do we think we can do? Because of course, there's still a lot that is being done, and we're very much welcome the experts debates that's happening at the UNECE. We need to be as narrow as possible to start with, to be task specific, to develop predictive models. We think self-learning functions in operation should not be allowed, and that the idea of having a black box inside the car generally should not be allowed, because it could be quite critical when it comes to safety. We want type approval approach with real-world testing, simulation, and audits. We want as much transparency for consumers as possible. And then, of course, we need to follow ethical and defensive approaches. So it needs to be improving the situation as it is, and be as close to the consumers as possible. So with that, I think that ends my presentation for now, and I'm looking forward to any discussion.
Great. Thanks very much, Lauriane. That was really interesting, some of the information you put on your slides. I wonder, could we just have a moment on the black box question in your final slide? I didn't quite understand what you meant by that, because it depends what we mean by black box. And is that a kind of a data recorder on the vehicle that you've got in mind? Or could you just explain that a little more, maybe?
Yeah, I think what we see from an FIA perspective is that we want the developments and the improvement in the EEI as close as possible and as open as possible. We want it type approved, we want it certified, so we don't want to have some sort of self-certification coming from a manufacturer or a group saying, well, you know, this system is perfectly fine. We want a certain level of scrutiny. I think that's where the black box comes, not so much on the EDR and things like this. What we would like to see is as much transparency, because these are ultimately societal choices we're making. You know, we're transferring part of a responsibility and liability from a user into a system. And then I didn't touch upon that, but obviously when it comes to liability in case of an accident, our utmost priority at FIA Region 1 is the road safety. So our utmost priority is that the victims will be compensated, treated, and so on and so forth. But when you open such a wide area, well, potentially you can see it playing out as triggering one responsibility against the other, and having a victim that's literally is never compensated or never properly taken into account. So really, it's more the human factor. And we think greater transparency will allow for a better situation for society at large. Great.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that you said. Thank you. So I don't know if there's any. We've got a couple of questions. So I don't know if you can open it to save me reading it. So there's a question specifically from Nigel Wall to you. Can you see it okay, Lauriane, or do you want me to read it?
Yes, I can see.
Okay.
I read the second one and then the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the updates, maybe I take that one first. Yes,
sure.
The question is that people are concerned that a user would be able to do an update and not the other. And also, you know, with secondhand owners of the vehicles, it could be a trick. I think it's quite clear in our position that anything that's really clearly relevant for safety or the environment and or certified type approved is not a choice per se, but that anything beyond should actually be there. So I think the challenge we're looking at is more, what do we define as safety critical, environment critical, and what is it an absolute must versus what's not a must? It's a broader debate when it comes to ITS as to, you know, we do want people to share data, but on the other hand, we also want to empower them. So these systems can only work with a certain critical mass. And on this one, for us, the only way is to inform consumers and to a certain extent, make sure they understand the benefit they derive from it, because it is quite clear for many users that, you know, their data is worth something, even if we don't want to say it's the new currency, it's the new gold. I understand this has been done and said quite a lot. It is worth something, and if I share my data with you, it could be for the greater good, because I want you to have better infrastructure, better roads, better road safety. But I might want to get something in return in terms of greater convenience, better comfort, better services.
Yeah, thanks, Lauriane. So helpfully, Mohammed has just mentioned in the chat that the questions and answers only come to the presenters, which I didn't know. So thank you, Mohammed, for mentioning it. So the question that Lauriane has just answered was a question from Nigel Wall, and I'll read it out. It'll only take a moment. And it reads, I'm a little concerned about drivers and owners being able to select which upgrades they allow on their vehicles. This could result in a divergence of behavior of vehicles. So someone using a similar car owned by someone else could find, hang on, it's moved. Hang on. So someone else using a similar car owned by someone else could find the car responds differently from their experience and expectation, possibly from their own car. So that was what Lauriane has been answering. Now, I think, time's moving on. I think we'll leave it here, Lauriane. I'm very, very grateful, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to stick around. I did have a similar question on the car-to-car issues, but we'll come back to that maybe on the open forum sort of panel session. And then I think we've got another question earlier on from Nigel. Let's leave it there. Thanks once again, Lauriane. We'll now move on to our next presentation, which is from Maria Alonso. So Maria, there you are. Welcome, Maria. So Maria is the Automotive and New Mobility Lead at the World Economic Forum. She leads the work related to software, digitalization, and automation in automotive. So that sounds to me like a pretty big job, Maria. Prior to joining the forum, she was an expert at the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, and has worked for the World Bank. She's also worked in the private sector, working for a road construction company and in a transport consultancy boutique. Maria has a PhD in New Mobility from Delft University and a Master's in Civil Engineering from the Technical University of Munich, and a Master's in Engineering from Madrid. So you're well qualified to join us on this session, reading your biography there. So Maria, the World Economic Forum, tell us what you think about AI and will it be safe for users? Maria, please.
Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of those who are joining online. It's a pleasure to share with you some of the work we're doing at the moment in relation to this topic. Let me now, and it's safety and automated vehicles, and are these vehicles going to be safer? So my first reaction would be they'd better be. Because if they are not, then society will not accept them. And if they're not being accepted, we will not be able to have them on the roads. So the question is also, what is safer? And some of the aspects that are being discussed is that safer means 10 times safer. And only if they are much safer than the drivers, as you and I are, then they will be allowed in the roads. So right now, the estimates say that over 94% of the accidents occur due to human error. This doesn't mean that the automated vehicles will be able to save all those 94%, but some estimates from BCG suggest that over 80% of those accidents could be prevented by autonomous vehicles. But these benefits should not be taken for granted. We are also going to have some new risks coming, such as cybersecurity, as it was discussed earlier during the session. And this is something for which, for it to work, we need to collaborate. Collaboration, I would say it's always a big word, and a word that's necessary when any industry goes further. But right now in the automotive industry, there's no other way. We need to collaborate across regions, we need to collaborate public-private, and we need to collaborate across industry. And this is one of the aspects, one of the initiatives that I want to share with you today on how the World Economic Forum, we're bringing together the automotive industry, new mobility, and the tech to try to face all these changes that we're seeing with automated vehicles. So last year, during our annual meeting in Davos, CEOs from these industries and some guests from the public sector, they met and realized that one of the aspects that we need to absolutely tackle right now and collaboratively is this transition into the software-defined era. So this AI-defined vehicle, which we tend to call software-defined vehicle, how is that changing, and how can we collaborate to unlock some of the benefits in safety, but also in inclusivity, sustainability, and resilience that are there? So you can see to the right the partners that we are engaging with, and we are looking forward after this first year to also engage some extra partners from other sectors, but that's in a second. So the first thing that we discussed with the community that you just saw was that at the moment, everyone is trying to transform how the vehicle is. And now it's not anymore just a machine, a machine as it used to be. It's a much more intelligent machine. And we need a new lingua franca. Every company is thinking about a tech stack and which is their tech stack in which they're operating, but everyone looks at it from a slightly different perspective. And when we've got so many different components, we need to speak the same language. And what does this mean when we're thinking about safety? And I've got here an exemplary use case. So when we're thinking about ADAS, for example, and we've got one object on the roads, what happens? We've got that vehicle platform, which is where the sensors are. Think of LiDAR, think of camera, think of radar. And those sensors, they're going to detect an object. At the end, when it's decided, okay, what kind of sensor, what kind of object, what should I do? That's when the actor executes. That vehicle platform is going to execute the action. But what has happened between that detection by the sensor and that action? We've got the computer platform where we've got chips that executes that software that's needed to perceive the object. We've got the software platform where we've got all the software that orchestrates all those ADAS processes. We've got the data, and among the data, we could think of 360 data by the user, which allows whether that driver is attentive or is not attentive at the moment of the object coming their way. Then we've got the application layer. And here we would have the different ADAS applications that classify the object, that calculate the trajectory, and that initiates or tells to initiate that steering. And then we've got that smart mobility ecosystem, where we've got that information that the vehicle right now has. It needs to be shared with other vehicles so that they don't need to do all this from scratch, and they already know what's coming their way. So this is a simplification of how the vehicle is now structured, and we can, with this exercise, see how the vehicle is not anymore a vehicle platform, and how industry players right now, they need to get used to all these changes that their core business is suffering at the moment. So this was about the lingua franca, but the other exercise that the community decided we needed to do from the beginning of this initiative was to see which is the stages that we're going towards. And we identified 4 different stages. And here from the beginning, these are not stages that should be confused with the stages towards autonomous driving. These are stages when considering the software-defined vehicle as a whole. And we identified 4 different stages: connected, adaptive, dynamic, and immersive. And as you can see here, that integration, that automation towards autonomy is one of the big transformations that the vehicle is having now, but it's not the only one. We also have an integration towards smart digital service experience, which is also very important when we're thinking about all those transformations that the vehicle is going towards. And earlier, because we've already kind of mastered it, we've got the transition towards electrification. 10 years ago, we thought that we would be much more farther down the line by now, and we are not. We're still at the beginning of that adaptive level with, for example, over-the-air updates. And we expect that in 10 years plus, we'll be around this side of the path. But let's see where we are, and let's see how we can collaborate together to really make this happen. One of the things that Ian mentioned before is that the software-defined vehicle, the intelligent vehicle, or however we want to call it, it's not just about bringing safety impacts and benefits. It's also about sustainability and inclusivity. So when we're thinking about sustainability, that vehicle is not only going to, it's going to allow us reduce energy consumption, but it's also going to allow us to charge when we've got green electricity. And at the end, we also hope that that same vehicle is going to help stabilize the grid. So it's a lot of things that the vehicle is going to be able to do beyond safety, even if probably many of us think that safety would be that first and most important aspect that we have to master. And that's not trivial to master for the software-defined vehicle to advance. There are different key strategic decisions that need to be taken to really advance these stages. And there's one revolutionary step that the community has identified, which is to bring together those industry efforts that account and that tackle the software and data complexity. And this is the thing that we've been tackling during this first year of the initiative. So when we're thinking about software, we need to collaborate in that vehicle software platform. And collaboration on the vehicle software platform can result in 80 to 90% decreased error rate in software integration. When we're thinking about safety critical aspects, this decreased error rate in software integration directly links to increases in safety. So there are two things to really help the industry collaborate in this software platform. One is to try to understand which is the end goal, which is the ideal picture of the software platform. And the second is, which is the roadmap to get there. So in the slide before, we looked at that overall roadmap, but when we're thinking about the nitty-gritty of that software platform, which is the roadmap that we need in order to achieve an ideal target picture that is going to help us take into account all the things that are necessary for that automation and beyond. And there are three safety-related aspects that we've been identifying. First is that the vehicle software platform should cover mixed criticality. And at the same time, it should be very mindful of what is safety critical and what is non-safety critical. With safety critical, we're talking about anything that is to some extent linked to safety. And with non-safety critical, we can think, for example, of digital cabin and other applications that are going to make the life in the vehicle nicer and more convenient to the user. We could even say that they require different developers. They require different skills to make sure that we don't have to come up with a new version every day, because this is not something that we can allow for safety critical. Well, this is something that we can enable for non-safety critical to increase convenience as soon as that can be achieved. The second safety-related aspect from that ideal picture that we're putting together is that we need to look very much into a standardized architecture. And it should follow industry-wide architecture frameworks, such as SOFI. So there are quite some technical groups in the industry that are helping bring together an architecture framework. And this is going to, at the end of the day, help decrease that software integration error rate. And the final point is, when we're thinking about the tool chain, it should be a continuous integration and continuous delivery tool chain to make sure that any error that we may spot, it is directly updated. As Lorraine was mentioning before, here we would talk about safety critical aspects, and we can have in a different discussion what happens with those aspects that want to be updated and that are not safety critical ones. So this is what we can do in the software platform to really try to bring up safety in the discussion. And what about that data layer, that data platform? There've been already quite some discussions on data by the previous panelists. And what we did was identify 5 key action areas to make data sharing, or as we call it, information sharing, really work. First, one of the things that comes again and again in discussions is to define roles and responsibilities. This is something which is still not completely clear. And this includes data privacy, data sovereignty, who owns the data, who can share the data with whom. We need clear data standards. Which is the data formats that we're going to use? Which are the interfaces? Which is the aggregation level? How much time do we need to share data? We need harmonized regulations across countries. This is something that the UNEC is continuously working into, bringing those regulations and making sure that they are there for different regions. And I think there's still more and more that we can do. And then there's the design tech infrastructure. Is it central, decentral storage? How are we doing it? How is it with that learning? And finally, identify value pools for the different groups involved. Which are the value pools when we're sharing that data and going from everyone involved in that change, from the consumer to the different industry partners that are helping make that happen. We've seen some very good examples of data sharing. We've got Catena X right now gaining momentum in the automotive industry to increase transparency in the supply chain. We've got IATA. When we're thinking about safety air transport, there was quite an improvement thanks to a data sharing platform that was put in place that brought together tech aspects, collaboration aspects, and policy aspects to really improve and make air transport the safest mode that exists today. And finally, if we're thinking about those aspects, they're not sensitive enough, we could think and get some inspiration from CIMI's healthiness. And they look into co-creation to improve healthcare. And I would argue that there are few things as sensitive as healthcare. So in our topic of safety, a question could be, could we exchange in-vehicle sensor and behavior data of incidents to improve ADAS and autonomous driving algorithms? And if we're trying to look at how this exercise would be and which are the different stages, we would first have a trigger, which could be that there's a sharp break, that there's an object on the ground. Then there would be some shared data, which could be perception data, prediction data, and this then goes into the classification. How is it being classified? Which kind of incident was that? The data is stored, and finally, we get some learning from what happened. This is a scenario which for it to work, we need to further narrow down. And there are a couple of reasons for this. Let's for example, focus on that perception data, and let's take one of the sensors. If we get all the data from that sensor, we could reverse engineer the sensor, which would in turn take out any incentive to improve that sensor. But if we're having very broad data, it may not be enough for the data to be useful to improve safety. So the why, what, and how, we need to really narrow down to make the information sharing, data sharing work, also for the safety aspects that we are so concerned about. One way to really make information sharing, data sharing more prevalent and make everyone more willing to collaborate is to really look into which value pools and which aspects we can do with that data, which moves us into the upper layers of the stack that I showed before. When we're thinking about that smart mobility ecosystem and those applications, about the different integrations that are happening and which additional integrations could happen to make this, to get the most value out of the software-defined vehicle and its ecosystem, it's when we can understand the different value pools and the different benefits that we got by pulling together data without the fear of losing some competitive advantage, which may be or may not be there. And this actually is the focus that we're going to have in this initiative during this coming year. And I've got here, I've put a QR code that you can scan, and you can reach out to collaborate if you would like to join this effort. What we will do is to map that smart mobility ecosystem landscape, to look into an interoperability check. How do we manage to really make all things linked together? And then to steer public-private collaboration for innovation of safer and more sustainable innovations in the smart mobility ecosystem. So this is one of the key initiatives that we're driving now based on the partners that we've got. And this looks a little bit more in the technical aspect, but we could argue that it's not only about technical, but it's also about how are we deploying it. At the end of the day, technology is not good or bad. It depends on how we deploy it. And that's why I want to introduce to you another council that we're launching later this month, which is a Global Future Council on the Future of Autonomous Mobility. And one key aspect of this council is that it brings together autonomous mobility in different modes. So it's not only about autonomous vehicles, but it's also about autonomous air mobility and autonomous sea mobility. How can we learn from the different deployments in the different modes of transport so that we're not working in isolation, but more we're learning from the aspects that other subsectors have already gone through.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a really helpful summary. Thanks. So on the Future Council, the one you've just talked about, how would people become a member of that? What sort of, is it organizations associated, or is it individuals and such like?
Yes, so it's a very small council. We've topped it to 20 people max. So we've got between 15 and 20 people, and we have really a mix of academia, business sector, and policy sector to try to get some key interrelations from the different stakeholders. So it's a truly multi-stakeholder, also from an international perspective. We've got Saudi Arabia, we've got Singapore, we've got different countries from Europe, we've got US from these different sectors. And yeah, I'm really much looking forward to it, and it's launching later this month. I can tell you more about it later, Ian.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, maybe this is a subject for Future Network Car 2024, possibly, and you can tell us more about it then. I think this, I mean, you mentioned your work with the different sectors in an earlier slide, and I was going to ask you about that, but I won't do it now. Because I think time's moving on, and I'd like to get Barnaby on. So thanks once again, Maria. That was a really interesting presentation. Yeah, a huge amount of work that your organisation has got underway and that you're leading. So I'm sure that we'll come back to it into our panel session shortly. So thanks once again, yeah, Maria. So Barnaby, welcome, Barnaby.
Thanks, Ian.
So let me give a brief introduction to Barnaby and tell you that he can walk on water. He's expert in all things automation. I've known Barnaby for a number of years. He used to work in London at trade body, the automotive body, SMMT. He's now the NVIDIA strategic engagement and regulatory body lead. He's done a lot of work on AI and assistive automotive driving. Both within the UN ECE and the EU, and also within the Euro NCAP organisation. He's a technologist, engineer, expert in all things to do with vehicles, and also he focuses on safety, the role of AI, and how synthetic data may be used in training and testing of AI-based systems. And of course, that's relevant to some of the previous speakers where they talked about the need to build greater confidence in users and such like around how these systems work. So Barnaby, maybe you could tell us all about your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for the kind introductions. And I'd just like to reiterate the gratitude that was provided by the other panelists on UNEC and ITU on hosting this event and giving me the opportunity to speak. The title of my presentation today is AI and Functional Safety. Like the other panelists, I've actually adjusted my presentation since Joost gave the first presentation. I want to give a bit more of an introduction to about how type approval has evolved over the last few years, looking back at what type approval was like around how to assess advanced driver assistance systems or complex electronic systems, and how that's evolved over the previous years when we started to look at level 3 automated driving, and then looking ahead, especially the work that's been done in UNECE and the EU on how to type approve automated driving systems. So looking at level 4 type systems. And then I want to zoom in into looking at how functional safety is assessed for those automated driving systems and those systems that use AI and machine learning algorithms within their system itself. It's probably worth noting as well that in the previous presentations, I got the impression that this switch from conventional software to AI and machine learning would happen overnight, and then suddenly all of the software modules on board a vehicle will suddenly be using AI or machine learning algorithms. This isn't the case. This is going to be a slow and steady journey about how we start introducing machine learning into an automated driving system or an ADAS system, starting off with a few software modules, then extending that into more broadly looking at perception as a whole. I think perception, the use of AI and machine learning is more focused on perception algorithms at the moment, but then as we move forward, get more confidence in these types of algorithms, then potentially control algorithms and decision logic will also use machine learning algorithms, because with control algorithms, there are very hard set functional limits that need to comply to. And if you had a machine learning algorithm, it's very hard to control compliance to those hard set functional boundaries, like having a lateral acceleration for your lane keep system not exceeding 3 meters per second squared, or having a certain deceleration rate for your AEB system. So this migration from conventional software over to using ML is going to be a slow process, and something that industry will be supporting to try and make sure everything is as safe as possible. So my first slide looks at what we're calling conventional type approval, or the type approval of complex electronic systems like ADAS, AEB, lane keep assist systems. For this type of type approval, you have fixed requirements and fixed scenarios that are included in regulations. There is limited number of scenarios and hard requirements must be met. To demonstrate that you meet those requirements within those scenarios, you would perform track tests. The track tests will generate performance-related data that would feed into your safety assessment or your audits that will be carried out. That part of the safety assessment is really looking at the performance of the ADAS system. And then in addition to that, you want to look at your safety management system. So does the manufacturer have processes in place to help ensure they can create a safe and robust system? Do they follow the principles that are defined within functional safety standards with safety of the intended functionality? So is the system going to operate safely in nominal conditions? We look at the SOTIF standard, and is the system going to operate safely in failure scenarios? And on top of that, you also have security-related audits that will look at the manufacturer to make sure that they can mitigate risks related to adversarial attacks that may occur on board the vehicle, but also at the manufacturer's plant or in the cloud, where some of the training of your software algorithms may be done. The FUSA, the SOTIF, the security, these are the fundamental pillars behind your safety management system. And there's some expectation that manufacturers will demonstrate how they follow the conventional V model approach. So starting on the top left-hand side of the V, where you start looking at defining safe system level requirements, and you go down to subsystem requirements, software requirements, hardware requirements, and you go back up the other side of the V, where you start on unit-based testing, integration testing, and then full system level validation. So this is a V model that is expected to be followed and very much used for conventional software. If we start looking at AI and machine learning algorithms, as I'll go through later, this is when we may need to add some bolt-ons to that V model to make sure that it is appropriate for AI and machine learning algorithms. So as we look at level 3 systems, there's already been mentioned from the previous presenters about the introduction of the ALKS regulation at UNECE, the regulation that will allow for the deployment of level 3 systems in the UNECE contracting parties. Fundamentally quite similar to conventional type approval for those ADAS systems. There is an introduction to real-world testing as well. There is real-world testing included for things like traffic sign assist in the GSR, but there is real-world testing for level 3 automated driving systems to make sure that the system itself can comply with road traffic rules across the entire ODD which you'll be operating in. There are fixed requirements, there are fixed scenarios within this regulation, but there is also an expectation that manufacturers will do an analysis of their ODD to understand what scenarios may be encountered for their specific use case, what road traffic rules are applicable to them. Because if we look at the deployment of an L3 system in Germany on a highway compared to the UK or another market, there may be some nuances related to traffic signs and road traffic rules, things like the evacuation corridor that you need to have in Germany. That isn't the case in the UK. You need to demonstrate that you meet those requirements, and using real-world testing is a very valuable tool to demonstrate that you have that sufficient level of safety and you meet the requirements. But there is certainly some flexibility as to what requirements and what scenarios may be used to support the assessment of these L3 systems. But the building blocks, the safety assessment, the safety management system remain the same. Then as we move ahead and we look at level 3, level 4 automated driving systems, the work that's been done at UNECE at the VMAD working group, this is what we describe as the NATM, the new assessment methods for automated driving systems. The principles of this are also adopted in the EU regulation for L4 vehicles that was adopted last year. There are a few more components to this because we need to make sure that these systems are safe, and it's a lot due to the size of the ODD, the complexity of the ODD, there needs to be a bit more freedom in how manufacturers derive the requirements and scenarios relevant for their use case. Because if you look at all possible combinations of ODD variations, the markets you want to deploy, the different levels of functionality, the different levels of automation, you can't have an exhaustive list of requirements and scenarios. There needs to be this flexibility in how you write those requirements and scenarios. So the bottom left-hand side, here we have the ODD, and you need to analyze the ODD to understand how you will test these systems. There is also an opportunity to conduct certification relevance tests using virtual testing environments. If manufacturers do use synthetic data to demonstrate that they meet the requirements of the ODD, then there is an obligation for manufacturers to also demonstrate that synthetic environment accurately represents the real world. And the VMAD working group at UNECE created a very robust set of processes that help the manufacturer structure the evidence that they put together to show that this synthetic environment is accurate enough for the specific purpose that it is designed for. So here we have another element around test environment assessments that feeds into the validation of your synthetic environments. Another element that has been added for the L3, L4 certification is the concept of in-use monitoring. And this is a topic that's come up in previous discussions that we've had today. How do we demonstrate that the system remains suitable and there isn't any issues due to data drift or concept drift of these AI, machine learning or conventional software being used in the real world? There needs to be some way of reporting to show that manufacturers meet a certain safety target, and to show that they are reacting to any previously unforeseen risks, and helping mitigate those risks by taking corrective or restrictive measures. So the concept of in-use monitoring is new for this automated driving framework, the NATM. And what I want to do is compare the framework we have at the moment for automated driving systems to how AI is expected to be assessed. And I'm looking at using the EU AI Act as a methodology for defining how you would assess high-risk AI systems and comparing it to what we're doing in automotive. Because in reality, from my opinion, how we assess automotive products like automated driving systems is very robust and matches the expectations of how you would assess these high-risk AI systems. So in red, I've highlighted a number of areas that may be AI specific and needs to be addressed, and how this NATM is reflecting that. When you look at testing AI systems, people use the term trustworthy AI. Now, trustworthy AI contains a number of principles that are derived from ethical norms, from legal frameworks, and sets the obligations on manufacturers to design a system that is secure, respects privacy laws, is explainable, is transparent, is safe. All of these elements are already being addressed by the automotive industry. And if we look at the NATM here, the concept of explainability is already included through in-use monitoring. For an autonomous system, there are many different types of explainability. For autonomous systems, the concept of having real-time explanations of why a decision was made when these automated systems are making thousands of decisions a second is not very useful. It's too much data. It's very uninterpretable. So the way that we're going to make AI systems explainable in the automotive sector is twofold. First, you provide evidence as a part of your type approval to how a system was designed, developed, and validated. Through this information, you also include things like your data sets that we use for training, testing, and validation. This builds up some evidence that can help you explain how an AI made a decision, or what potentially was an issue with an AI system in the case of a critical event. And again, the panelists earlier talked about the use of EDR, data storage for automated driving systems. There is already obligations for manufacturers to collect data in the event of a critical event, and then leveraging all the documentation as part of a type approval, you can explain why a AI system made a certain decision, or it certainly can help manufacturers post-process all this data and try and come up with an explanation as to why these decisions were made. So that concept of explainability is already really well covered in use monitoring. We also talked about a lot about robustness and this concept of having a black box. Yes, AI systems, machine learning, deep neural networks can be complex. They can be difficult to explain. You could also argue that conventional software is difficult to explain. When you've got millions of lines of code looking at a certain functionality, that is difficult to explain. Through the NATM, we're creating a scenario-based approach for demonstrating that the system will remain safe in all foreseeable scenarios. So you don't need to necessarily understand exactly why everything is working within a deep neural network for a perception algorithm, but you've validated that it works correctly in the ODD. And this is where the very robust analysis of the ODD is important, such that you can support this black box assessment to demonstrate that you are safe in these foreseeable scenarios. Then we look at the concept of transparency. Transparency can take two forms, typically. You have transparency of the system, and you have transparency in the design and development of the system. Type approval as a framework very well covers type approval of the design and development of the system, because you have to collect huge amounts of evidence and documentation to how you design the system, and you are being transparent about how it was designed. Another aspect of transparency is demonstrating that either the system is active and you're interacting with other road users. So there's a possibility, I know a number of stakeholders have talked about having things like external HMI to show that other road users are interacting with an automated driving systems. There's pros and cons for doing that. I think we're going through some decisions at the moment about whether we think external HMI is useful, but we have HMI inside the vehicle as well. So the operator or people inside the vehicle have information in why or what maneuvers may be occurring, and you've been transparent about those decisions that are being made by the automated driving system. You see a lot of cars at the moment have a thing called confidence view, where you have an image of the vehicle in your dash. You can see other road users that are detected around the vehicles that can give you confidence that the automated driving system is seeing the world as you expect it to. Then the other items were around functional safety and security. Principles of functional safety shouldn't really change. The fact that we're making an AI machine learning system safe. The processes that we follow will remain relatively similar. However, there are specific AI-related risks that need to be addressed. And some of the standards that I'm going to talk through in a minute will helps to flag what those relevant risks are and appropriate tools to mitigate those risks. It's the same with security. Security, we have very robust cybersecurity management systems that are regulated right now. The management system doesn't change. The management system remains the same. However, you have new attack points that you need to consider about how to mitigate risks. So suddenly we have a data set that's used for training AI machine learning models. That data set needs to be encrypted and secured during transfer and at rest to make sure that you can prevent any data poisoning attacks or adversarial attacks to the data set that will cause the system not to operate as expected in the real world. So, from a security perspective, things remain the same. One thing that I do think is slightly different and may need to be addressed in the future is around data management. Having appropriate data life cycles and having a data life cycle that links to the V model that talked about, that's derived from things like functional safety, how you manage that data, how you set appropriate data quality requirements to make sure that the system will operate safely is very important. Making sure you decommission the data correctly so you don't violate any privacy laws about retention of that data or data minimization requirements. So how we manage that data, I think, is something that could be addressed in the future. I won't talk through these standards in the next few slides, but there are significant work that's going on in ISO, IEC around data quality and data governance. There's the 5459 series that has 6 different standards that all look at data governance, data quality requirements, and data lifecycle. These can be used to help support us in how we apply appropriate processes to this V model that I previously spoke about. So that's where I see some of the similarities and differences about how you assess AI. And I want to zoom in onto the AI and functional safety concept. There are standards being developed at the moment or have been published already that help support AI functional safety. We have the ISO 22989 that is a foundational standard, looks at concepts and terminologies that can help use to interpret the requirements of the other standards that are around functional safety. Then we have the ISO IEC TR5469, which is the functional safety for AI systems. This is a standard that is industry agnostic, but does provide a framework for how you apply these requirements to the automotive sector. And then we've got the SOTIF standard, ISO 21448, that includes an annex around implications of using machine learning. We have the ISO TS 5083, which is the safety and cybersecurity for AI. And then the ISO PAS 8800 safety for AI used in road vehicles. So we already have a fairly robust toolbox of standards that can be used to help make sure that the AI systems that you're developing are functionally safe. Just going into a bit more detail about what those standards are and what they consist of. The 5469 addresses one of the issues again raised by another panelist about how you classify AI systems. The technical report itself includes a 2-dimensional matrix that defines different types of AI systems that may be used, classifies them, and then highlights what functional safety requirements can apply to those different classifications of AI systems. So in some cases where you do have things like continuous learning that is used, then maybe functional safety requirements as they are wouldn't be as applicable, and you may need to look at new measures to help make sure that those systems are safe. It also goes into more detail about different AI-related risks and how you mitigate those risks. It is a TR, so it is more of a qualitative assessment of all these tools and apparatuses that can be used. The plan is it's going through the final publication stages at the moment. We expect it to be available in a few months, so spring 2023 is the deadline, after which the group is going to then look to develop a technical specification and have included more more qualitative to quantitative targets that can be used to mitigate those risks related to AI systems. Then we can go on to safety of intended functionality. ISO 21448 just includes an annex at the moment about the implications of using machine learning, but provides a very good framework for manufacturers to first set safety targets, gives you options of safety targets that can be used, and then you need to demonstrate that the machine learning AI system can meet those safety targets. Provides you tools to how to minimize the potential number of unknown scenarios that may be encountered, and how you analyze your ODD to come up with a very robust framework for testing these types of systems. It has been published relatively recently, and stakeholders are collecting feedback to provide more details about how machine learning can be covered by this standard. And I expect in the next edition for more details to be included. Then we have the ISO PAS 8800. This is a very good document. It takes the 5469 standard and applies and provides the automotive context to it. So it has a list of very specific AI machine learning related risks that may be encountered in the automotive sector and methodologies to mitigate against those risks. It's quite a read. I think it's about 160 pages, 170 pages, but provides a lot of very valuable information to the reader about how we make sure that these systems are safe. It's currently going through, I think, we're on the second working draft at the moment. We expect it to be published in a year's time, so March 2024. And then we have the ISO TS 5083. This is a document that describes a process for design, development, and testing of these systems. It does have an annex as well, and some information about how to use machine learning, but again, helps contextualize all the things that we have in functional and operational safety standards. What is the type of software architecture that would be needed to support redundant systems? How do you make sure that these systems have enough redundancy appropriate for their use case? How do you make sure that you include things like software diversity, so that the AI or machine learning or conventional software itself can operate safely in nominal conditions, and really build a robust system. So this was a TS that was built from a industry document that was drafted about 2 or maybe 3 years ago now. Safety first for automated driving system, but then was turned into an ISO standard, and it again contains very valuable content for the reader. This TS is expected to be published by the end of 2023. So, in summary, from my opinion, the way that we assess automated driving systems at the moment, right now, is very robust. It's one of the robust certification frameworks out there. It is already covering a lot of the trustworthy AI principles that need to be considered for high-risk AI systems. When we're making good progress to including this in current legislation, and we have standards as well to help us contextualize the requirements around AI and machine learning and describe appropriate methods to mitigate against those risks that have been talked about before. So I think we're in a good position, and look forward to reading more of the standards when they become available.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Barnaby. That was really interesting. And there is a phrase in English that says something like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I certainly come in the old category of that. And I learned a huge amount listening to your presentation on the work that's underway and well developed. So thank you for talking us through all of that. There is something I was going to ask you though. Or could you tell us a bit more about the phrase you use, trustworthy AI?
Yeah,
you know, sounds great, and I'm sure that Lauriane would be interested to know more about trustworthy AI, but I didn't quite understand what it meant. Thanks.
So trustworthy AI is a phrase that pulls in a number of different principles that would need to be followed to make sure that AI is trustworthy, so that it will be accepted by the consumer, accepted by bystanders who are not necessarily interacting with an AI system, and regulators and safety authorities. A lot of different, well, there are a lot of countries have their own trustworthy AI principles. A lot of companies have their own trustworthy AI principles, but they all tend to follow or have a lot of overlap. So if you're describing something to be trustworthy, you need to make sure that it follows or is secure, to make it follows privacy laws, it is safe, it is explainable, it is transparent, it doesn't discriminate against users or bystanders. There are many different ways of describing it, but it helps build together sort of high-level objectives that need to be met to make sure that AI is trustworthy.
So is that within the company would have their own framework for that, or is it that they follow a documented procedure?
So it provides the foundations for companies at the moment to create their own validation strategies or create their own requirements for systems. You do have things like the OECD's trustworthy AI principles that are fairly well adopted, but it's a case that certainly for the automotive sector, we already have regulations that cover all of the different trustworthy AI principles. We've got things around some privacy, security, safety. The whole type approval framework is orientated around making sure these systems are safe. There may be some gaps or some topics that are less mature. Things like explainability, bias. These are quite difficult concepts because there's no right answer for explainability. There's no such thing as a completely unbiased system. It's up to industry, it's up to governments to be transparent about how they design the systems, what metrics they use to indicate the system has met an acceptable level of bias. There is a lot of freedom for manufacturers and companies to develop their own frameworks, but we're just all guided by these common principles at the moment.
Great. Okay. Thanks once again, Barnaby. I'm going to call a halt now. I'm going to have a 10-minute comfort break so everyone can just stretch their legs, maybe get a drink or something. And can I suggest that we reconvene at 3:25? I think it's 3:16 now, so that's 9 minutes, which, you know, a minute here, a minute there won't matter, but around about 3:25 Geneva time, if that's okay with everyone. But thanks once again, Barnaby. Really great presentation, and we'll be back in roughly 10 minutes time for the panel session. Thanks very much indeed. Hi everyone, welcome back to our panel session. I'm hoping that our presenters can all join me on screen. See Barnaby, I don't know whether Maria and Lorianne and Just are there. I don't know if I can't see Lorianne, but she may well be there. Anyway, let's kick off. So in our chat, we have a few questions. So let's go right back to the very first one that was, I think when Lorianne was making, or maybe Just was making his presentation, and I'll read it out and we'll see how we go on who might have a view on this. So the question is, continuous learning is clearly critical to making systems safer. How will sharing of learning about previously unrecognized hazards be shared between manufacturers? Hazard identification should be shared, but reaction to these hazards can be proprietary. i.e. manufacturers might see it as something they want to deal with individually for their own product. So I don't know, has anyone got a view on that? I guess this is possibly a vehicle manufacturer or system. Barnaby.
Yeah, I can go. So I think they use the term continuous learning, which I think is something that manufacturers are going to be staying away from. We have obligations to meet software update regulations that prevent things like continuous learning of vehicles in the fleet. Even if manufacturers are collecting production data, so of vehicles that are operating in the real world, they will collect that information, aggregate it, and then choose of that data what may be used to help retrain or update AI machine learning models that are used in the field. They will then they will retrain those models. They will validate those models either on a system or an integrated level, and then they will update vehicles in the real world with the new models. So the concept of continuous learning is something that wouldn't be done in practice, certainly for safety critical systems. The sharing of scenarios as well is something that is interesting. In the EU L4 regulation, there is requirements around in-use monitoring. UNEC are talking about in-use monitoring and sets obligations for manufacturers to share information about how they are meeting the safety targets that they defined within their type approval. So manufacturers will be sharing this information with authorities. So then authorities can come back and if they are seeing that there are a lot more accidents in a certain area or certain environmental conditions, they may be more stringent on how those requirements are assessed to cover that area. Then there are also tools as well, like scenario sharing databases that are already available to use. There are things like Safety Pool, which is a collection of scenarios that have been derived from things like accident data, from real world data, and is a very good resource for manufacturers to share scenarios. The more scenarios that you contribute as a user, the more scenarios you get back from it. So it really encourages the sharing of scenarios. And that is a very useful tool.
Yeah, I think the World Economic Forum is involved in Safety Pool, so maybe Maria might have a view. But you were, I think, agreeing with some of the things that Barnaby was saying. Have you got a view?
Yeah, well, sorry, Maria. Yeah, should I start? Yeah, on data sharing. Well, there are always two sides of the coin, of course. I know vehicles share data based on mandated data sharing and sometimes also based on voluntary, on front conditions. Now, there is one specific thing that I highlighted in my presentation in Europe. We have the safety-related traffic information. That is, we call it SRTI, which is a subset of the ITS directive. There's a mandate to share these data once you have them. You do not have to produce them if you don't have them. But if you have the data that are available, and that's why we created the data for road safety ecosystem with OEMs, with suppliers, with service providers and member states, road agencies, and it works pretty well. So we have road data in the system that is being upgraded to events data, such as slippery roads or road blockage. And that is being used by the vehicle manufacturers for the HMI or other, I would say mirroring, for example, to smartphones on the HMI. But that's not the same as sharing your interpretation of these data, what actually Barnaby was hinting to. How do you interpret and learn in the future these adaptive things? I'm not sure that's yet shared, to be honest, but I don't know. I need to discuss this. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Just. Maria, Safety Pool. I think you're involved in that.
Yeah, so Safety Pool was developed during the Drive Safe initiative, which Joost mentioned at the beginning during his presentation. And there, the idea, as Barnaby mentioned, was that you share and then you get back. As a two-way interaction to really make sure that you give and take when it turns to safety aspects. Other than that, one aspect that I wanted to highlight is that when we're talking about sharing and hazards, we could still do more across regions and across countries. How do we make sure that we are sharing these aspects not just within one region, but to without all regions. And the other aspect is that when we've got a hazard and there's one trigger that causes it, different manufacturers may look at that trigger differently. And what is that threshold that triggers the trigger? And this is something where we still need to have more clarity across manufacturers to make sure that when we're sharing this information, we're all having the same baseline.
Okay. Barnaby, what do you think about sharing the information?
Yeah, so I think sharing information is important. I think manufacturers should be rewarded for doing so, because some manufacturers may have more data to share than others. Those that are newer to the markets may benefit more so than those larger, more legacy type companies that have a lot of data to share. So I think there needs to be some sort of incentives to promote the sharing of this data. And having real world scenarios is important because it helps you validate that you meet certain safety targets in the domain in which you're operating in. However, there are many other tools that can be used to help explore the input domain to really prove that you are robust. You can use synthetic data, and you can take a real world scenario, maybe it's from accident data, and augment it to generate hundreds of thousands of scenarios from that one scenario. So having accident data is a good initial source, but you can use tools to help extend that scenario pool to 10, 100, 1,000 times greater than what you originally had. So we need to use both really to really explore the domain and demonstrate that the systems are safe.
Yeah, I mean, Lauriane in her presentation talked very much about transparency, and you know, there is a risk surely somewhere in there that if a manufacturer finds a problem, they solve it bilaterally with the approval authority and don't tell any other manufacturer that this could be something they would face.
Yeah.
And so let me bring Lauriane in, because I think, you know, it's important that we get a spread of views on this. So Lauriane, please.
Yes, indeed. I mean, thanks a lot, Dan, and thanks, Barnaby. There was a lot of valuable content. Some of it a bit too technical for me to dive into, but definitely quite worth looking at. What I had a bit of let's say question mark around when you were saying, and indeed, thanks for picking it up, Ian, about the trustworthy AI. From my perspective, if every country and every manufacturer is able to design its own little set of rules around common principles, we're not there yet in terms of being as self-explanatory and transparent to consumers, because then, you know, if I buy a given brand of vehicle, or if I use a given brand or another brand, then I will get potentially slightly different, but still different boundary conditions. So to me, that's a bit maybe the limit of that. So a certain amount of standardization, not when it comes to the greater principles, but to the widely spread type of functionalities would be more than welcome. And the other part as well would be, you did mention cybersecurity as one of the pluses examples where it's working well. It is self-certification at this moment. So to a certain extent, and not to wanting to bring it back to my black box, but it is a bit of a black box as to what's being done to ensure the cybersecurity, at least as a consumers, and what's being done to check compliance in real life. So from a consumer's advocate point of view, it is a bit risky that, of course, we don't want all the technical details about what can be done and what is done and so on. We do want a certain level of transparency or a certain level of checks, not necessarily performed by the consumers who don't have this know-how, but by the authorities, to make sure that there's let's say, a certain amount of standardization or a certain amount of checks in these regards.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So Barnaby, you know, how do we? Is it possible to deliver some of what Lauriane has just said through some of the standardization work that you mentioned? I'm not going to pick on you specifically. It's just, and I'm very conscious you're the only vehicle manufacturing software representative here. So I think when you've sort of responded to that, I might move on to our next question.
Sure.
Thanks.
So yes, currently there may be some divergences on exactly what trustworthy AI principles are considered by each country or each company. However, the vast majority are aligned, maybe 80, 85%, making sure that all of them do cover some of the core functionality that is expected, like again, security, privacy, safety. These are core things that are not that are included in basically everyone's trustworthy AI principles. There are some nuances that some may include things around like governance or accountability that someone else doesn't, but the core components are all there. And I think those types of trustworthy AI principles are important for those less well-regulated sectors, but automotive is extremely regulated. We have requirements around security, and in Europe, security does require some third-party conformity assessments. It does look into the manufacturer's security management systems, because you want to make sure that manufacturers have processes in place to make a secure system. However, they can't be very explicit on what those requirements are, because if suddenly you had a security regulation that defined 10, 12 different methodologies for specific methodologies for making systems secure, then you could make a whole industry unsecure, because they're all too well-defined requirements. So things around AI trustworthiness, I think regulations should be focused on processes, because we are all learning. It's going to be an iterative process, like the AI models that are used in the real world. We're going to be learning over time, updating these systems periodically, and then coming to a consensus of industry to what trustworthy AI really means. And I think we need to share information about how we deal with trustworthy AI, but it needs to be a learning process.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, Barnaby. Yeah, let me move on, because it'd be very easy just to stick with this one question, because there's so many kind of avenues or strands that you can go off on in this question. Now, I'm going to go to our last question in the chat, but I would ask anyone in our discussion and on the meeting, please put your questions in the Q&A bar, and then we'll be able to bring that into our discussion. But Nigel Waller's asked about so this is maybe a question for Maria. It's about safety pool again. And the suggestion is that some manufacturers will be more able and will discover more issues and scenarios and such like. So how will those high level contributions, for example, in safety pool, be rewarded, and are all manufacturers signed up to it? So in other words, if you contribute more, do you get more out of it, or do you get the same as someone contributing 2 scenarios, or how does it work? Maybe Maria could respond to that. Thank you.
So the more you contribute, the more that you can get from it. But having said that, if you have limited contribution that you can make, the idea is not that you can only get a few out of it. At the end of the day, this is just a mechanism to try to reward contribution without the aim of limiting what you can get if that's limited contribution you can make. And right now we're still learning how else can we reward contribution. Indeed, this is one important aspect to make sure that we are going into that safety goal together. Without that, sharing information, sharing data, it's going to be difficult if we don't see those value pools for the different stakeholders that are putting in their time, their resources, and their costs in that.
Yeah, I'm pleased you said what you said, actually, because it always feels to me as though the initiative of safety pool is something that's an altruistic process. It's about providing something to help the development of safety systems for AI and automation. So I think it's important that anyone contributing can have access to as much information as is available. And I imagine that the large manufacturers that might have more capability than the small manufacturers to contribute would see this as part of the development of automated systems. So I don't know, other panelists, do you have a view on this particular question about access to the information? Yes.
Yeah, Well, we have exactly the same question on the European national access points. You know, in Europe we have EU27. We have national access points for data, original data sources, mostly for traffic-related and dynamic and static data. The question there is, you can put data on this national access point that is available for everybody. It's kind of B2G and G2P approach. But who is the master of the quality there? Who is the master of ceremony? Who determines which quality level you will have? Is it good data in, good data out, or garbage in and garbage out? And with all the consequences, if you have automated driving, basing its decision on a data set that may be less of quality. So this is not with AI, this is just data sharing. And that's still a question we have in that project with Europe and NAPCOR, how to assure a minimum agreeable qualitative standard data. Probably the same questions we have now, even more, when we have automated driving decisions being based on that. It's even more safety related, of course. But at least in the non-safety world, we already have that question, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution to that, except if you have a regulatory authority that is a third party, because somebody talks about dividing of competences and so on. So, but then even then, you need to certify, you need to have an attribution of power to that institution, and saying what is then the minimum level, a minimum threshold to say this is qualitative data and this is not. So yeah. We are still struggling a bit with this, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay, Lauriane, I see you nodding when Jus was commenting on sort of the skill set and such. I don't know if you have any views.
Not to deep dive. I mean, it's a general question of it, you know, when and how the data should be shared. We discussed as well on the user's perspective. For me, anonymized, pseudonymized data that allows these systems to be developed should be available. For sure, that's not something on which we'd hammer on, you know, consumer choice, as long as it's not linkable to the user. We have a number of initiatives when it comes to road safety and so on and so forth. So that's something that we wholeheartedly support. But obviously, I'm not able to comment on whose manufacturer would be able to provide what data, and that's way beyond what I can talk about.
Okay, look, I'm going to keep you. I'm going to keep you maybe for a moment, because I'm going to ask an Ian Arnold question now, and it comes back to a point that was made by Barnaby in his presentation. Sorry, Barnaby, to keep picking on your thing, but you used the phrase very early on, which is that vehicle manufacturers will make the vehicles as safe as possible. And there's a question about, is that good enough? And you know, that I'm sure will take us through to, you know, FNC 2024 to answer that particular question. But you know, what does a consumer expect? And the question of the session with, will AI controlled automated vehicles be safe for road users? Not safe as they can make it, it's will they be safe? And so it's a very general question, and I'm sure each of our panel members will have a view on that. But let me go to, well, I'm going to go to Lauriane, because you know, you're the representative here of the motorist and the consumer, and I wonder what your thoughts were on that.
I certainly like the Ian Arnold question, so thanks a lot for keeping us on our toes. And certainly it means Barnaby's presentation had a lot for us to reflect, so it can only be that we keep on referring to your presentation. Yes, I mean, on a side note, but I think it was an interesting anecdote. It's old now, but at one point in time, before we were talking so broadly about the connected car, I was also told, you know, a key and a physical key to a car is not 100% secure. Although there are expectations that a physical key would be the safest of the system. So I think on a development point of view and on a vehicle manufacturer's point of view, it's clear that the 100% won't necessarily be achievable. But I would side with Maria, as she was saying as well. Yes, if I'm going to give up control as a consumer of my car, I expect it not only to be a bit safer than me, but to be totally safe. And I think there we need to indeed manage these expectations. And that's why I wanted to start a bit with the Euro NCAP survey, that some of the manufacturers making all their commercials around this is driverless and the car is taking over and whatever are not necessarily sending the right message. They are creating expectations that, you know, and me the first, if I'm going to give the control up to my car, then it has to be 100% safe and I have to be able to engage in something else. That's my expectation, because then I'm willing to give up the control, willing to give up, my freedom to actually steer the vehicle, which I think I still do pretty well. So yes, there will be around defining these boundaries, explaining to consumers what it means. And I don't believe it can be rolled out with consumers on board if it's not safer and in a way significantly safer than what we have at the moment.
Yeah. You mentioned Maria's presentation, and I wanted to bring Maria in next, actually, because in her presentation, she talked about other sectors, and specifically you talked about aviation, and I think you said IATA, which has, very interested in the aviation sector. So is there any learning you've got from your work in those other sectors to bring to what is it that the consumer expects? Because aviation safety is high. There's a huge amount put into the safety of aeroplanes and such like. How can we translate that over to the vehicle sector, where costs, an aeroplane costs, we always talk about £100 million for an aeroplane, and we're talking about 20,000 euros or $20,000 or whatever it might be for an average passenger car. They're different orders of magnitude in terms of the ability to implement safety in high volume production vehicles. So Maria, tell us what you think.
So I would say at the end of the day, it's the same story. We need to make sure that we don't undermine consumer acceptance of this new technology. And to make sure that that happens, it is a win-win if we are maximizing safety, whatever it is. What we can, so the air industry, what they really did was to double down on all the technology that was possible to ensure that airplanes are safe. This, I would say, is the same that we are doing in our industry, right? We try to maximize the use of the technology to make sure that we are making the safest vehicle possible. The second thing is to look into standards. Which are standards that we need to put in place for that sharing of information of the key aspects that are going to make sure, that are going to enable that an accident doesn't happen twice. And the third, and without which nothing would happen, is collaboration. Collaboration. This is key at this stage to really make that big transition to the bigger safety. And I would, whenever I'm thinking about safety and the fact that vehicles need to be safer, we need to remember that we are human beings, and as such, we are allowed to have flaws. If someone makes an accident, everyone understands that an accident can happen, right? Because we are human. But we don't understand if a machine makes an accident because we don't have any compassion or mercy with the machine. And that's also the reason why machines need to be much safer for us to accept an accident happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could I add to that, Ian?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Let me bring Just in, because I think Just had been wanted to take the floor a moment ago.
No, saying. I don't know. I read your mind because I was thinking about airlines as well, automated pilots, which is automated driving actually in the air. We've been now invited to the Amsterdam Drone Week, I think in a couple of days now, to talk about drones, the urban air mobility, and the lessons learned from automated driving and traffic management, and using the space, literally using how does it work in the sky, not so high, and the urban air mobility. Exactly the same question, but that difference that EASA, which is European Aviation Safety Agency, has very strict standards on using algorithms, on using testing methodologies and validation of that. So we might have a look at what they are doing. Good that Maria brought that in as well. I had the same issue, and what strikes me in this discussion, we always talk about vehicles and perception management of the outside, but we don't talk about communication technologies. And maybe that's another thing, because we have the ITU friends here. They're dealing with communication technologies, the telecom side of the equation. Maybe there we should also discuss a bit on interoperability. Yeah. When I have a legacy fleet, supposedly that we already an automated driving L3, and we have a legacy fleet, and then suddenly we have a new technology coming up, we should be sure that there is a compatibility and ideally interoperability, otherwise we have a problem of talking to each other. Yeah? I don't know should we have a backwards or an upwards compatibility, but as I said, as Maria said, everybody's used to do Office with Microsoft and it all works by coincidence. but it's down to, there is some brains behind this to make it backwards compatible. And I think we need to think about this also in our sector. We are only at the start, but let's think about the future.
Yeah. Yeah, we're definitely at the start, but it's moving very quickly. So let me bring Barnaby in, because I think he has some observations on this general question. Barnaby.
Yeah, sure. Just on the user's expectation of what is safe enough. In functional safety standards, there are safety targets that should be met for automated driving systems. For the highest level of safety, there is a statistical approach for determining what is the expected likelihood of a failure or a severe failure in the system that could cause an accident. And the idea is that you then put measures in place to mitigate against those risks and meet those safety targets. So functional safety standards have targets for likelihood of a failure. Then if we look at systems that are operating in nominal cases that are not in a failure condition, then you have the EU's L4 regulation, the regulation for automated driving systems, has an indicative safety target that should be met by manufacturers. And this is that there shouldn't be, or there should be a less than one fatality in 10 to the -7 hours of operation. So we have targets that are set for nominal cases and failure cases. The EU, the Commission, when we were drafting the regulation, set that target to be 10 or 100 times greater level of safety than compared to human driving. We were looking at road statistics, and that was 10 to the -5 or 10 to the -6 hours of operation. So we did look at that. We did design a regulation such that it will ensure these systems are safer than a human. So measures are put in place there. And if we then look at the use of AI machine learning algorithms for enabling this level of safety, actually machine learning algorithms are very robust. They have the capacity to be able to operate in environments that it hasn't seen before. So I'd actually go against what you said in his presentation about AI machine learning algorithms can only provide inference based on if it's seen that data before. This isn't the case. The way that we design and develop these systems, we have training data and we have testing and validation data. And when you look at measuring the quality of an AI system or machine learning algorithm, you're always using test data that hasn't been used for training. Because if you do, then you could cause the AI machine learning model to be overfitted to the training data. So we are always looking at validating these systems on data that hasn't seen before. That enables this type of technology to be very good operating in extremely complex environments like we do have in the automotive sector. So machine learning is very good at that. If we relied on more conventional software, then it's up to the imagination of software developers to hard code all the possible combinations of what a pedestrian could look like, and then hard code that into your computer vision algorithms, which is you're restricted by the imagination of those developers. So that's why building an AI model, building a model based on data allows for a far more robust algorithm when actually operating in the real world. You're on mute, Ian.
Thank you. Thanks, Barnaby. I have to say you lost me in some of those things you were talking about there, and it's back to the old dogs, new tricks question, I think. But there we go. Look, I'm very conscious of time. I did just want to give just a moment to tell us again about the ITS Congress that's coming up very shortly, because that's another opportunity, I think, to continue to discuss these issues, and I'm sure AI will be high on the agenda at the ITS event. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And this is not a publicity spot, whatever. It is just highlighting. We have the ITS European Congress coming up in Lisbon on the 22nd of May. It's for 3 days. We have, well, a lot of live demonstrations, some of it automated vehicles, some other automated things, I would say. It's with 8 different sectors we do that. Commissioners will be coming as well, at least for the European side. And around 4,000 to 5,000 people. That's our assumption. It is to test and trial new concepts, a lot of technology, obviously. ITS is about technology and innovation, but also data sharing. So the mobility data space discussion that we have, from which we are part of, we will be make it tangible there. And ideally, a good case for networking. It's about having meetings live in person and not through Zoom. Zoom is perfect to reach the whole world at once, but live meetings are even better in a networked way. So
okay, let me give the other presenters. Maria, is there anything you want us to add before we close out the session?
Looking forward to the next sessions during the rest of the week.
Good. Okay. Well, thanks very much. Lorianne, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, thanks a lot for having us. Thanks a lot for the good mix. I think it was a really good balance of more technical, more societal, and consumers were quite happy to be on board as well for this first session. Good luck for the rest of the event.
Yeah, right. No, it's important that we have the consumers represented. And Barnaby, you've answered a lot of the questions in our discussion this afternoon, so you might want to not take the floor, but you've got the opportunity. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, nothing to really add from what the panelists have already mentioned. Just thank you again for the opportunity to speak at today's event. Look forward to hearing more over the week. Great.
Okay. Well, let me, on behalf of the whole session and all the 90 or 100 or whatever people that have been on our session this afternoon, thank all of you. So Barnaby, Lorianne, Just, and Maria, for your presentations. I found it truly fascinating, I must say, to be moderating this session, and we've had a mix of, judgment, perception, and also a lot of technical detail, which I think has been really, really valuable. Let me also thank Stefano and Gifty from ITU for the organising and the technical side of it, but also Francois Guichard from the UNECE for helping me with the organisation, or well, in fact, doing all the organisation. Not really, I helped him more than he helped me, and his team. Laura and Melissa have also been involved. So with that, I think that kind of draws us to a neat conclusion. Thanks once again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll leave it there. And good luck for the rest of the week to the ITU and the FNC team. Thanks very much, all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Ian. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan. And thanks to all panelists who spoke today. I really enjoyed today, the first day of the symposium, that gave us really good insights on the challenges that UNECE is facing, especially in the WP29. So I also would like to join Jan by thanking our colleagues at the UNECE, Francois Guichard and Walter Nissler, mainly. So it's thanks to them, that we can organize this session one at the symposium, and as today showed really an interesting one. Also, I want to remind everyone that the symposium continues tomorrow, and then the following day and the day after. So we have 4 sessions, one every day. So tomorrow, 14 of March, at 13 CET, we will start with another interim session that will focus on using automotive artificial intelligence to improve vehicle safety services and transport management. It will be moderated by Mr. Michael Sena, and I anticipate another excellent lineup of speakers will be there tomorrow. Please remember to register for tomorrow's session. The registration that you had today will not help you to join tomorrow, so please register for tomorrow if you are interested in attending the session. Thank you all for joining today, and I hope to see all of you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.